Good evening and welcome to IGE Talks. We are here on October 3rd, 2013, recording our October episode of this monthly grassroots TV show produced right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Panels of impromptu guests who show up, people from all walks of life, just ordinary folks, citizens like you and me, who get together on the first Thursday of the month here at the Institute for Global Education, located at 1118 Wealthy Street Southeast, just down the street from Wealthy Theater. Talk about different issues of the day. Sometimes it's current events headlines, sometimes it's bigger issues of things happening out there in the world or in our communities. And so we welcome you just to kind of sit back and watch what we have in store for you. It's always unpredictable, very fluid, and very much spontaneous. Talk show, something a little bit different than what you see in the canned talking heads on your cable news controversy of the day. My name is David Blakesley, and I am here to just facilitate the conversation. We would invite you to sit back and enjoy what we have prepared for you, which is, like I say, kind of spontaneous and spur of the moment. So I'm a board member, or not a board member, a former board member here at IGE. It's a local grassroots organization that's been in business since 1980, promoting issues of peace, justice, equity, and conflict resolution in a nonviolent manner. So let's just go around the room, introduce ourselves, who you, and find out who we are. Katie,
I'm Katie Villaire. I'm a board member for many years at IGE, and I'm a retired sociology and anthropology teacher from some colleges in the area.
My name is Paul Mayhew, and I work with a group throughout the state called Voices Not Heard. I'm a retired clinical psychiatric social worker and retired county commissioner. Even though I still get called commissioner. Actually, I'm retired from a lot. So I get a lot of sleep now, I get a lot of rest. And, I've been around IGE way before they were American Spend Service Committees. So that's a long time.
Good friend of IGE.
My name is George Bradley. I'm excited to be here to talk about these two issues today.
My name is Liam Considine. I'm a Grand Rapids native, a recent college graduate, and I was interested in the topics and the community that IGE is a staple of.
I'm Jeff Pacific. I'm a citizen that's interested in a lot of the issues that are discussed here.
Mike Franz, IGE board, and local coordinator for MoveOn.org. And I'm here primarily tonight to learn about this human trafficking thing. And I'll probably be asking more questions than anything. So.
I'm Chester Lowe. I'm a IGE board member, also producer and director of the talk show here, as well as I work with the Criminal Justice Chaplaincy as a mentor and learn more things about what happens in the community that way as well.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Wright. I'm a faculty member at Fair State University. I have a doctorate in sociology. And my interest in human trafficking is because of my students. I have a lot of students who care about human trafficking. And so I've done reading on it and learned a great deal from them. Kind of fits in with some of my topics of interest, such as race and inequality. And on the second topic of the evening, the government shutdown, I'm just a cynic.
All right, good to have you, Bonnie.
My name is Emily Jones, and I am a recent Ferris graduate, and I'm here to learn and talk a little bit more about human trafficking.
I'm Ken Jones, and I'm just here to be along with her.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming, Emily. All right, we are going to start our topic, our conversation tonight on this issue of human trafficking. The cliche, I guess, goes that prostitution is the world's second oldest profession, something like that. And prostitution has always been, since I've come of age, kind of tinged with scandal and this kind of issue of immorality, people who just kind of get into it because of a corrupted character or something. But in recent years, I guess, maybe months, or for some people, maybe even just recent weeks, there's been a different cast to this issue, not just prostitution, but also what we might call slave labor. The reality that a lot of people in this world today are the victims of commercial exploitation by people who have various forms of leverage, power, and control over them that force them to do things that they might not otherwise be doing of their own free will and volition. Or even if they think they are making those free choices, they're so coerced, so manipulated, so pressurized into certain acts, behaviors, labors, chores, whatever, that we can say they are in a form of servitude. So we're going to spend some time tonight talking about this topic of human trafficking. It's a subject that I have some familiarity with my professional work, which is Wedgwood Christian Services. It's one agency here in Grand Rapids that offers a ministry to people who have suffered abuse, neglect, and trauma. And I've been in that organization and in this field for 2.5 decades now. I'm not really here to promote Wedgwood's specific efforts, but I'll just do a little disclosure on my personal background. We've gathered a few people who have some insight on this topic. Human trafficking has become a little bit more of a prevalent issue in political, economic, and law enforcement terms, where, as I said, sort of the tone has shifted a little bit. We're not just arresting prostitutes because they're out there corrupting innocent bystanders. We recognize across a variety of disciplines that a lot of young people in particular, or a lot of people in situations of poverty or other kinds of oppression, are sometimes resorting to, cooperation with people who will see them as objects to be sold or otherwise exploited so that they can make money. I want to start with Katie. Katie Belair, you've been a part of IGE for a long time, and IGE has addressed a lot of issues of social injustice, oppression, discrimination. What is it that's drawn you into this particular topic of concern of human trafficking, whether it's sexual, just low-wage labor, sometimes forced labor, just for mere bread, housing, and survival? Tell me a little bit about your journey to come to this issue.
Well, it's something I am just beginning to learn about, and I think it certainly is in the area of social concerns that IGE always addresses. It underlies many other kinds of problems, but I just want to mention two other really important parts. One that we know a little bit about, and that is economic trafficking. And here and there, we hear about people being imported into the U.S. and used in sweatshops, and I guess we're beginning to find out that it's not just small factories where people are kept as prisoners, but also nannies and people who are in the country already illegally, and then they're blackmailed into working as slave labor. And I am sorry I didn't bring tonight. There was in the National Geographic this month a really powerful picture for me. There was 3 boys I'm trying to remember this African country where there are many, many gold mines, and there are 3 young boys who were obviously kidnapped and turned into very violent soldiers and guards. And that's very much a concern of people who are looking at human trafficking. So it really indicates this is a worldwide problem. And if anybody was listening to Diane Rehm today, she had an hour of experts on human trafficking, including a kind of a middle-class English woman that got trafficked into Italy and was kept as a prisoner and couldn't leave. So it's in Europe, it's in Asia, it's in Africa, and it definitely is in the United States and Latin America.
Yeah. So it sounds like we're talking about, are we talking, like there's, the sort of uncomfortable thing for me is that there is a system in place now where do we draw the line between low-paid labor and slavery? Like essentially, there are people doing things that they think are best for their children, or their children are, you know, out engaging in these tasks and labor that we would, as Americans, say like, no child should ever have to do that.
Right, it's beneath my dignity, or there's got to be a better way, whatever the case may be.
Right, and so I wonder like where you, I mean, obviously the not being free to leave is a key component. Obviously, you know, any sort of blackmail and things like that. But I worry, or it's sort of uncomfortable to think about the fact that at the bottom end of the day, you basically are going to have to say, like, be okay with the fact that the system that we've created forces people to work for wages which in conditions which we ourselves would never work.
That's one of the things I really like about the topic of human trafficking when I'm teaching, is that it makes people think beyond the normal boundaries. And they ask questions about things like, wow, is it okay for children to work? And yeah, of course it is. I mean,
Right,
for
exactly.
generations upon generations, for however many years we've been around, children work, and that's part of our socialization. And then we ask ourselves in each situation, is that part dangerous to their development? You know, is it something that's helping them become a functioning member of society, or are they being exploited and thrown away like garbage? And there's no solid rule. You know, if for sexual slavery, I mean, okay, so maybe people used to marry young, but I mean, how young? And when is that then getting into development? Sometimes you just know, you don't have to think twice.
Right.
But then you think, well, how many of us have the choice of where we're going to work? Or are we just taking whatever jobs we have? What about our prison system where people are working for 12 cents an hour? Is that human trafficking? Yeah, I don't have the answers. But I think that we have really, the thing about the study of human trafficking is we have questions, and it really makes us think about our morals.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's right on. Or it really makes you think about if you had to be put in a situation where your options are all bad, what are you going to do? Or like,
Yeah. There's quite a history to this business of slavery and trafficking.
Back in the time immemorial.
With human,
right.
yeah, I mean, but you can go all the way back if you like to biblical times.
Well, sure.
I was really appalled by one practice I heard about back in the 90s, and that was rich Saudis would come to Egypt, and they would find a father who was willing to sell his daughter, and they would marry her, drop a piece of paper, and he would pay her $30,000, and he would have full use of his virginal daughter for 6 months or something, and at the end of it, they'd tear up the paper, he'd go back home, and that was perfectly fine. You know, is this human trafficking, or, you know, where do we draw the limits?
Yeah.
Because there are fathers in Indonesia and other poor countries in the Far East that do virtually the same thing. They sell their children into labor and into prostitution.
Not just virtually the same thing, they do the same thing, and their kids might be 6, you know, and they may be selling them to somebody for a TV. And then that child has to have sex with maybe 5 people or more a day.
Yeah, I think it gets into issues of, you know, are there kind of universal rights that children or people as people have that say they will not be subject to exploitation, and do we have a legal system or even just a social ethic that says if we hear about this, we're going to move in and try to prevent it, regardless of whatever traditions or, you know, customs of a different society we might have to challenge or even, you know, aggressively impose. Because I think probably the argument could be made in some more, you know, traditional or societies, and, you know, the Indonesias, the Saudi Arabias, other parts of the world that, well, we've been doing this for generations, you know, and the world hasn't come to an end. But I think we do have to wrestle with some of these deeper ethical, philosophical issues. And in this society, I think we have a pretty strong consensus. It's not a liberal versus conservative issue at all, that, you know, until you come of age, you do not have to put up with that kind of exploitation or coercion. And if responsible adults hear about it, we're going to move in to try to stop that and punish those who perpetrate what I'd say are unambiguously these crimes. So, yeah.
I think America has a tier system in terms of looking at this type of situation.
Okay.
You know, we have the housemaid type situation, you know, where the servants, basically. And then we have the situation with the employment where you work temporary service. And then if we go back a little ways, then we have the crossing the borders type situation.
Sure, immigration and all of that.
The Mann Act. I'm speaking specifically in America.
State lines.
Oh, okay.
The Mann Act.
Gotcha.
Where Jack Johnson, who was one of the persons that I remember vividly, that got caught in a human trafficking type of situation, even though the woman that he was with was in love with him and they were going to be married.
She was underage, I would presume?
I don't think she was just a white woman.
Oh, he was a black man?
Jack Johnson was a black boxer.
Boxer, yeah.
Okay,
Gotcha. So he had a white girlfriend, and he got prosecuted under the Mann Act, which is an act that deals with human trafficking inside the United States.
And when about did this happen? Do you know what decade?
Oh, Jack.
That was back in the 20s, I think?
No, that was
30s or 40s maybe?
The 30s?
Before the
prior to
30s.
that.
I saw the movie, and they were the early fighters, you know.
Yeah,
Yes.
early bare knuckle
Sure.
fighting.
Yeah,
Okay.
1900.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay, so segregation laws, Jim Crow was in full effect, nobody was
Yeah.
questioning it, it was just the way it was.
But still,
Okay.
if we fast forward to today, we still have laissez-faire type attitudes toward that. You know, when a person can be hired and not have benefits, you have to work, you know, that way because you're just working at the whim. And a lot of times, if something happened to you on that job, or you see something go down wrong, you have to decide whether I'm going to report or not because I don't have benefits, there's no protection for me. And now that there's the lack of unions, it's even more scary.
Okay. Yeah, well, and then, again, some would say, well, it's just the market.
It's just the market.
Yeah.
I think that's like one thing, at least for me, that is like, may sound sort of radical, but like the whole act that pretty much nowhere in the world except like very few places can like, is the sex industry regulated? Like any, you know what I mean? There's no
Yeah.
regulation at all.
Yeah,
So
there's a.
Regulation on what?
in terms of who's
Sex workers.
In Sweden, we do have.
Like, so in
Okay.
Sweden and the
Also in
Netherlands.
Sweden does have laws, and that's one place where they're trying to kind of use that as the ideal. Some are, some aren't, and that's where the division is.
Sure.
But Sweden has strict regulations, so if you're caught buying sex, you are prosecuted. So it's the opposite of what we have here, where the women are being prosecuted there. They even tap the phone lines for deals of sexual services being bought, and they prosecute those buying, and that, and this is a relatively new thing, but they're saying that this is protecting the women and girls in their culture.
Sure.
I think it can be tied back to what you said about our girls, or our children. They can't consent until they're of age.
Right.
And so anything beneath that can be considered trafficking if they're being sold and crossing borders, being sold in their neighborhood. But then once they hit that age, all of a sudden we go to it's their fault because
Yeah. Regardless of what their background was or how
yeah,
much they've been
so
abused prior to that.
That's a really
Right.
fine line, and that's another really good topic,
Yeah.
that, what is it at that age of consent where you're a victim, you cross over that line, now you're 17, and you are no longer a victim, no matter what's happened to you, you
Yeah.
chose it.
Yeah.
So that's another good conversation.
Okay, well, yeah, it is, and I think to go to that other, not extreme, but the other end of the spectrum where there's regulated sex industries, where there's sort of a government authority saying, okay, we're going to approve of a commercial transaction.
But that sounds like two different things.
It is, well, it's two different things, but it's a really significant shift in attitude, where in the past, we've had this very top-heavy, the purchasers are almost immunized from any stigma or legal ramifications if they're caught soliciting sex, whether it's underage or an adult. It doesn't matter. They're sort of let go and winked at and sent off into the night, while the women or the male prostitutes even are the ones who are rounded up and jailed and indicted. We're in the situation where now I think there is a recognition that abuse and trauma and exploitation does represent a violation of a fundamental value, and we're trying to find the ways to provide treatment and protection for people who have found themselves into those circumstances. And I guess I would like to talk a little bit about maybe what's happening a little bit closer to home, because a lot of our conversation has been what's happening overseas, and while that's disturbing, it's kind of out of reach. The work that I do at Wedgwood is involved in training, so I haven't been as involved. But I know, Emily, you did an internship with our Manasseh project, and just to talk a little bit about services for victims of sexual trafficking. There's a recognition that young women, oftentimes they've been abused, they've run away from home, or they've just been vulnerable because of a lot of neglect that's happened in their lives, are caught up in what turns out to be a very disciplined process that pimps and hustlers go through to recruit a group of women. The word pimp has become part of slang, and it's often portrayed kind of humorous or comical, or kind of one of those kind of features of American culture.
Pimp my ride.
Yeah, pimp my ride.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's not funny.
it's mainstream
Pimp up my
TV,
house.
right?
Yeah.
Right. And even oh man, you're pimping, or oh, you're such a pimp, whatever. And it's just kind of breezed through as if it's no big deal.
And some people succumb to that.
Oh yeah, of course. They strive for that status. That's kind of I've made it. I'd like to say that the tide has turned. I think we're a long ways from that, but there are places that young women and men can go to get some support and be shown the way. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about what you've done with Manasseh, or anybody else who might wants to get into that. But I'll invite you to talk about that a bit.
So with Manasseh, I worked directly with Andy Soper, and I kind of did two different things. I worked with his outreach and education, I guess is what it would be, education of the community. So I did a lot of that, which was a really neat aspect. But then I also saw more of what we have with the Manasseh House and the services that are available. And to list services, I know there are a lot of organizations right here in Grand Rapids. I think the ARC was one of the places that dealt with youth.
The ARC being kind of a runaway shelter for
Yeah.
kids who just didn't have a place to go. Right?
And that's where it gets hard when you're trying to name these services, because like we did it for Art Prize last year, Andy covered poverty, sexual abuse, substance abuse, homeless and throwaway youth. Throwaway is a term used. Normally children and youth aren't running to something, they're running away from something.
Right.
And we're not going after them, we're leaving them out there on the street. So
Yeah.
he termed that throwaway instead of runaway. And there was one more and I can't think of it, but so then we have services within each one of those
It might be the
communities.
immigration. I mean, sometimes it's people come brought in from overseas
Yeah.
who are basically helpless.
There was, I can't remember what the word was, it was on there, but, so then you have services within each one of those, and there could be a large list there, and I
Sure.
can't think of a bunch of names for that, but, for the homeless and throwaway youth, we have the ARC, and there's several other different shelters in town. But then really what it comes down to is connecting all these services.
Yeah.
So that when you go to one, they can look, you're there for substance abuse, but you can also, the workers can look deeper into these kids and see other issues,
Right.
maybe sexual abuse is what drove them to substance abuse.
Right.
So when these services connect, then we can better help them instead of dealing with one issue and sending them back out on the street.
Yeah.
So it's a very broad topic, and I wish I knew more about it.
If you're curious, we talk about the Manasseh project, and I worked with Andy for a number of years. What happened, we have residential treatment services, and several years ago, one of the girls ran away from the home that she was residing in. And they had a bad feeling that she was gonna go make some connections with some people who were not working in her best interests. And they drove the streets, they roamed some of the neighborhoods where she was known to hang out to see if they could find her. And she did finally turn up and came back into their care, but she really was like a shell of the kid that she had been after just a few weeks on the run with the drugs, the abuse, both sexual and physical. And it really moved Andy and a couple of his other co-workers to say this is just not acceptable. And Andy, who's a direct care youth treatment staff at the time, worked with a lot of people and did a very impressive bit of work to engage donors. He did some fundraising, he did some consciousness raising to start this residential program that's really not just a home for girls who've been through hard times, but really targeting this specific issue. And a lot of other talented individuals have come together, so I'm very proud to be associated with that, even in an indirect way. So I'll give a little plug and shout out to my colleague here, and maybe we'll do a future episode that Andy can tell you a little bit more about that. I'm just kind of wondering, as we think about, you know, what's happening in our community, because like we say, we've got kids who are natives of West Michigan, come from bad, dysfunctional family situations. We've got kids who come from other countries, and their vulnerability, their innocence, their naivety about how things work in this economy and in this society make them prime suspects. We talked about the throwaway kids. If a pimp can get 6 or 8 months of service out of a girl before she's just kind of wasted due to addiction or violence of whatever sort, well, that's 6 or 8 months worth of profit, so to speak, and then on to the next kid.
And it's actually estimated that a runaway, someone out in the street, will be approached by a trafficker or a pimp within 48 hours.
Yeah,
So
it's
there we
amazing.
see
Sad.
the kids that are going out. We need to get them, but we need to get them quick within. If the kid
Yeah.
runs away, we need to contact the services that can help.
Yeah.
Whether you know them or indirectly know the situation.
And a service that's truly therapeutic, not just shameful, you
Yeah.
bad girl, you shameful slut, blah, blah, blah. Katie, you have some ideas or some thoughts you want to share with us a little bit?
Sure, yeah, I think, and just, you know, a few statistics there. I have this, I can hardly believe it, but this is from Michigan Abolition Movement Organization, nonprofit. But we, you know, I'm sure, and maybe you've got some numbers about, you know, about 100,000 a year in the U.S.
Yeah,
and-
100 to 300,000.
Yeah, I
average.
think they say they're not sure about that. Maybe 20 million worldwide, and or more.
I think it's actually around 31 that.
Dude, I've got 32.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think
20 to
with what
30.
you're saying, it's such an black market thing that we can't know numbers for sure, so whatever you have, the numbers are always changing, but.
Yeah, you can't put your finger on it, you know.
But the
We've
estimates.
got Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah,
You know,
sure.
where,
Yeah.
There's
you know, you got
Centers.
people
Really?
that wanna go out and become models
Yeah.
and get involved in the movie
Yeah.
industry
Yeah.
and stuff like that, so you get,
Yeah.
you know, the pimp has a way of doing, they call it turnout. And the turnout is an actual real process
Mhm.
that happens to that person. And it kind of makes the young girl feel good.
Oh, sure.
About it. And then the turnout comes, and all of a sudden you're out there in the
Yeah.
street, and it gets pretty vicious, you know, I know.
You
And
can
I
see.
work as a clinical social worker, and I know we've worked with the police department, Grand Rapids Police Department, who had at one point in time put social workers in police cars. And there is a program, I forget exactly the name of that program, where, you know, if a prostitute is picked up at night, then they're referred to this particular program where there is a safe house, where there is somebody that can debrief, where there is somebody that, you know, is directive in their counseling, and try to help talk them off the street and kind of understands that, you know, this is not the life.
What's interesting is talking about the turning out process.
Mhm.
It's amazing to me how many, in our pop culture, how many songs have that in it. I
Right.
just heard
Oh.
a song today by Nicki Minaj but she was turning out other girls.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've heard that in other songs, but I hadn't heard it in that song yet, and it just slapped me in the face again that
Yeah.
It's a
culture as a
process.
whole.
Did you
Right.
ever?
That's the thing
Yeah.
keeps getting me, is we're talking about sex as if it's somehow separate from other types of work.
Yeah.
And it is more severe in the sense that it's really deep and personal, and it's obviously exploitive.
Yeah.
But then we come back to the thing that he mentioned earlier, and that is, we have an entire economy which is based on selling parts
Oh,
of
yeah.
us.
Well,
And this is just, puts it in our face. And then you were talking about how we have people who are working for hardly anything, who don't have any choices. And so it becomes a gradation from the top to the bottom, where the reason the whole pimp and hoe thing flies is because we all feel like we're a pimp or a hoe.
Yeah.
You know, and which side do you want to be on? Do you want to be on the pimp side or the hoe side? So being a pimp sounds good, and being the hoe sounds bad.
Yeah.
But why don't we just care about people
Right.
and think about that? I mean,
think
so
you
what if the
really
girl
hit
turns
it.
17?
You really hit it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, in terms of pop culture.
Right.
In
We
terms
can
of
throw
what
Rihanna
people
in there. We can
are
throw
listening
Miley
to
Cyrus.
the
All that.
pimp,
Right.
the hoe.
Uh-huh.
That's what sells. See,
Well,
we know in America.
A good example of that
Sex
goes
sales.
all the way back to the turn of the century, Frankie and Johnny, the ballad.
Frankie and Johnny.
Where
Frankie
lovers
and
know how
Johnny.
those two
Frankie
could
and
love.
Johnny.
But he was
Yeah.
doing it wrong because he was up there fooling around with Alice May,
Right.
expanding his corral, so to speak.
That's
And she's
right.
down in Memphis, you know,
Yeah.
on the night train,
Mhm.
doing his bidding.
Well,
you know.
I
I mean, but they turn it into this glorified
Turning into
thing
a
where
glorified
Frankie
song.
finally
Those
gets
are,
even with Johnny.
I guess the seeds were, but I mean now, I mean just last night, I mean I don't go
Yeah.
looking for this, but you know, coming up on my Twitter feed, watch Rihanna's raunchy new video, which is basically, I guess she's doing a stripper pole dance and showing Miley Cyrus how to twerk or whatever. So it's like, this is not underground, off in the fringes or shadows entertainment. This is the mainstream
But connect that
pop
to the
culture
fact
on
that,
TV and
connect
everything.
that to the fact that we just stopped giving people the cutting food stamps.
Right, well, right.
It's
right.
like, now people,
So
we
what
don't
do you got
care, we
left?
don't care
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
no, we don't care that that person's going hungry. Well, we don't care that that little girl's in the street or that little boy's in the
Right.
street.
And
Or
she's
somebody
It's
might
hungry.
not
have to
caring.
go out and sell themselves to try
Yeah,
to get some
it's
money to
not
buy some
caring.
bread.
And that's
Right.
why poverty was one of
That-
the root
well,
causes.
poverty
Yeah.
is one of the root
I
causes.
have kind of, this is from Megan here, from poverty and homelessness. The demands of the globalized world of technology.
Yeah.
Abuse, all the addictions, relational gaps in the, background of, that makes them so vulnerable.
That was that
Yeah.
fifth one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And human how do you say this?
Objectification, right.
Objectification.
Yeah.
And there are just so many people, just worldwide.
But did you know anything about the Slumdog Millionaire issue?
The movie.
Yeah.
Slumdog
Yeah,
Millionaire?
the movie Slumdog.
Yeah.
Right, did you
What
know
about
that
it?
Yeah.
one of the children that was in
Yeah.
that, the parents of that child, I think over in India,
Yeah.
was on the news about, or being accused of selling his child or daughter to
Oh, the
someone.
parent of one of the actors in that
Yeah.
film? Okay.
Yeah. In
Well-
all truth, whether or not that was so, we don't know, but that's what they were accusing the person of.
Well,
And
again,
it hit the worldwide media. So I thought
sure,
maybe you knew it.
there are a lot of parents who will exploit their children in horrible, insidious ways. Some of it's, really graphic, whether they're selling them into sex slavery, child pornography,
Mhm.
forced labor, or, maybe somewhat more benign ways, just in terms of, beauty pageants and sexualizing them in other ways, maybe not quite as graphic or intense, but certainly, I mean, I mentioned Miley Cyrus, and I don't mean to just pound on her as a media whipping post or anything, but she was raised in this very bizarre pop culture, and this is where she's at 21 years of age.
I kind of liked what she did.
Well,
yeah, or
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I think that's
And the
like
reason I'm
going
gonna say I liked it because it was so bad. She acted like a guy in a way.
Well, she's
It was
throwing
like-
back
yeah.
at the audience, at
And
the
the
pop
guy
culture,
who-
what she's sort of been
Right.
raised to
It's
do.
like she's
Right.
critiquing it, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking the guy she did it to has a video out that's vile against women.
Oh, yeah.
I disagree. Why do you find that video vile?
What's
The-
that?
Blurred lines.
Blurred lines, what, like?
Blurred lines, because I don't see that if a woman's willing or not willing to have sex is blurred.
But I don't think that that's the whole interpretation of that song that I've heard that I feel is really incorrect is the assumption that the woman is saying no to him.
But, okay, that's a different topic.
Well, no, I think it's related
Let's
because it's
follow
just like
up
the
on it.
whole
Okay.
Sure,
the
that's
whole
fine.
pop culture thing. I think that there is a difference between like women being able to be sexual and like sexual trafficking.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that raises that, and it's all interpretation, so we're all over the board on it, this whole room is
Yeah,
all over the
sure.
board on it,
Yeah,
but
we could definitely
it's
go on.
called blurred lines.
Yeah.
And it's about, I mean, that automatically to me assumes judgment. And then when you watch the video, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody,
Yeah.
but it's naked women dancing around with little kid toys and dead animal, or a goat or something, I don't.
And
Well,
it
you
says,
know,
I watched
it
it
says
once.
he has a big D on it, you know,
Yeah.
I'm like.
And that's just inappropriate to you, but there's nothing
No,
wrong with it.
No, it's
When
just
he
in
was
the
little,
environment. I don't
yeah.
mind if he says he has the big penis. What I mind is that it's in this environment where we're not sure if she's willing or not,
But-
and there's baby
Yeah.
toys.
Well, and it's being marketed to very
Refuse.
young children, and I think that's where I do have an issue, where, you know, it is an exploitative gesture when it becomes explicitly marketed to young
But
kids.
especially when
Yeah.
the girls are dancing around with no clothes, so
Right.
girls are sex, and the
But-
guy is dancing around fully clothed.
But those
and in
girls chose to
control.
be in that video, and they didn't choose to be in that video
But
because they
we're
were
saying
desperate. They chose to
association
be.
of culture.
Right,
But-
right.
You show kids.
But what I'm saying is that what kids need to do is have like an actual philosophical understanding and realization that just in their everyday life, purchasing the things they're doing and going about their daily life, there are these people being trafficked.
Oh.
And that their appreciation or liking a music video isn't the root cause of that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's
but
not
it,
the root
it
cause.
gives them subliminal suggestions.
Well, and there's also
See,
a commercial
I mean, when you
aspect
talk
That's
of
about-
just,
it, right?
when
to
you
me,
talk
that's just like
about-
making an excuse for
No,
it.
it's not an excuse.
It's called
When you
socialization.
talk about socialization, re-socialization, you talk about channelization, you talk about thinking, the social learning theory.
Yeah.
You're talking about people being trained to do aberrant things in this community.
Well, let's talk about a
So, would
controversy
you
that came up a
because
couple.
people-
I think they should ban it.
Finish your point, Joy.
I think you've made my point for me. If you think
Well,
they should ban.
Well, banning it, I don't know, I mean,
Right.
I don't
They should
know.
ban it.
Government censorship, I have a big issue with that.
I'm not talking about government,
Right.
I'm talking about us.
Okay, well, okay, but we had an issue, as a Montana a few months ago, there was a very controversial court decision made where a judge sentenced a teacher, an adult in his 30s, to 30 days in jail because he had gotten sexually involved with a, 13, 14-year-old girl at the time, and the judge gave him an extremely light sentence because the girl was quote-unquote mature beyond her years and kind of got into it, maybe seduced the teacher a little bit, and of course there was this huge outcry because the judge had, you know, kind of sided with the perpetrator and victimized the girl in a different way, who wound up committing suicide as a result of all this trauma and controversy that had engulfed her.
Now-
And, well, and I just want to say, you know, based on my own work experience, I've worked with a lot of young girls who've gotten really mixed messages or destructive messages based on their media consumption and lack of adult guidance, saying that, you know, once that puberty hits, it's time to get it on. And I have a really heavy heart for kids who just really didn't get a chance to get off to a good start in life because they sucked that stuff in under neglectful parenthood and whatever other chaos
It's
they've
not
grown up with.
necessarily neglectful.
Well, not-
Look
I'm
at
not-
Barbie.
Well,
Look
okay.
look at Barbie now.
Yeah.
Barbie, when I was a kid, is different than Barbie now. Is like a hoe.
I think she was always a hoe, because
Like-
you look at her origin, she
Yeah.
came from Germany,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
she was a sex toy.
Yeah. So here we got Barbie. Well, all the little girls love Barbie. We had to desensitize my granddaughter from Barbie. That just happened.
I
Go ahead.
don't know. To me, it just seems like that judge, I don't think that judge gave that guy a light sentence because he listens to blurred lines a lot or has a cultural perception.
He bought into an idea that this young little vixen, this little.
But I'm saying that
kind of-
idea isn't
Yeah.
new, and in many ways, I think is an idea that is like part of this like patriarchy, like
Oh, and it
male-dominated
needs to be
society that's
combated
like.
and taken down. I support you.
I just
Yeah.
think that there's a difference between. I think that there's elements of that which are really against like naked women dancing around with animal heads.
Oh, God.
Like, just yeah.
I want to ask you, Kate,
Come on, Chester, get it out.
what happened to the boys?
Yeah,
None
that's
of
a
you
good
say anything
idea.
about the boys
That's a
being
good idea.
exploited
Boys
too.
are being sexualized too. Boys
Absolutely,
are being
I'm
sold
okay.
on the streets.
All right.
Isn't that
Boys are
beautiful?
being raped. Boys are
Boys-
being forced into labor. You know, 1 out of every 6 boys is assaulted sexually.
But
So when I'm standing in front of a class and I'm talking about rape, I have to think, 1 in every 6 boys in my class has been a victim of rape. And if I make it sound like it's a female problem, then what am I doing to this boy?
That's right.
Yeah, so thank you.
I think where it comes in, and you're exactly right, 1 out of 6 boys, and it's 1 out of 4 girls, so we jump to the girls, but you're very right. When there's even child boy prostitutes, you can call it, are being sexually exploited, but the male prostitutes who are growing up out of that, talk about Las Vegas.
Mhm.
They're there, so
Yeah.
it's very.
They're also
They're,
in.
they're
Grand
centers.
Yes.
I was really
Believe it
surprised
or
to
not, I know they
hear,
are.
they're really, this time of rape, sex trafficking, and, is the Super Bowl.
Well, yeah.
No, really?
Well,
Yeah, I
yeah,
read that.
all these
Yeah.
large gatherings, I mean, the Super Bowl is just kind of the biggest event in the Western world,
What
at
about
least.
art prize?
I was gonna
Well,
say,
yeah.
is that so? I didn't know.
I think, well,
There's people-
anytime there's a big.
When there's a
convention, yeah.
gathering of people, there are people out there, pimps or hoes or whatever, that says, hey, let's go down, we dress
Sure.
this way, and somebody's gonna say,
Oh, yeah.
what,
Yeah,
hey.
if people are coming from their home quarters, wherever they are, to see the big.
Well, it's
you know,
not just gathering, I mean, there are many gatherings of people
Yeah.
that isn't.
Well, it's just
an issue.
it's a numbers issue. When
Yeah.
you get large conglomerations, there's
Yeah.
gonna be some sex trafficking and other
Yeah.
things that go
Well,
on.
it's just
And
an
it is
economic.
cultural.
Yeah.
If you see, you go where the money is. So
Right.
if
Yeah,
you've
Yeah.
got
that's right.
And people-
thousands of people and you've got what they want,
Yeah.
you go to it.
And especially when it's people with money. I mean, if you go to the Super Bowl, there's
Exactly.
people with money going there,
Exactly.
and they're partying, and they're living it up.
Gambling.
And a lot of this
they're
is
ready to go.
corporate sponsored.
Oh, of course, yeah.
No, I mean,
There'll be
the
a
corporation,
line,
and then the
there'll be a
government
hall.
steps in and they have their bureaucracies that have their parties.
Yeah.
You know,
Like,
it's
you wanna get us
crazy,
home.
you know,
Well, yeah.
I-
Political conventions that happen every 4 years.
You wanna
No, no, we don't do that.
Operation Tailhook and,
We
Glad-
politicians
we're glad
don't
to
do
hear
that.
Glad to hear that.
All
We
right.
talk business all the time.
I think they recently avoid the topic of boys
Sure.
and men as victims is because we can't imagine boys and men as victims.
Or we just don't want to.
I think we
Yeah.
can't. I think
Yeah.
it's like part of what he said with the patriarchy. We have this image.
Yeah.
There's a professor at Ferris who taught that, and I hope he still doesn't, but he used to teach that men can't be raped.
Mm.
Wow.
He said that, and he's teaching from a biological perspective, and I guess his only conscious way of thinking of sex is like a penis and a vagina, and that the penis is willing, and it's just like, well, no, that rape
Yeah.
is a complex thing. It's not about specific body parts even.
Right, it
you
doesn't
know.
even have to be sexual in a sense. I mean, it can be any number of other violations. I mean, as far as
Right.
body on body, it can be object on
Right,
body.
right. And so, like, another time I'm in a classroom and there's a really, I'm not gonna say names, a really great professor who's a wonderful public speaker, and he's talking about how he doesn't have to fear walking because he's a guy, and he goes on. And I was listening to him and I was getting kind of like offended. Because I'm thinking, you're deluded if you think you don't have to be afraid of walking around because
Well-
you're a guy and you don't have a vagina.
I mean-
Because
Well,
guys
that's
are
a-
more assaulted than women when you think of
Yeah.
violence.
And
They're more
what's-
often the victims of violence than women. It was like something like 90% of all guys' victims are guys.
Well, what is he trying to accomplish with this kind of denial?
Like,
What's his-
he was saying how he
Yeah.
he has to be empathetic with women, but his empathy with women is us as victims. guys can be victims
That's
too.
very patronizing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is, but it's also delusional.
It is,
And I'm
right,
thinking of
right.
all the kids who are in his, grown-up kids, who
Mhm.
are in his class thinking and they, listening,
Yeah,
and
he's
they've been
reinforcing some
victimized.
terrible
And they're like, oh, I
stereotypes.
can't say that I've been a victim.
I mean,
Right.
I think that that's kind of taking it a bit far. 'Cause I obviously wasn't in the classroom, but to me, like as a man, I'm cognizant of the fact that like if I'm in a parking garage at night and it's just me and a woman there, like I don't want to make her nervous. Like, and I feel like that's something that as a man, like there is a responsibility, like there is like that's known, and
Well,
that I don't think that that's
sure, I
me
mean-
saying men can't be victims or anything like that.
Well,
It's-
sorry.
or like trying to like patronize anybody. It's just trying to be respectful of people's
Yeah.
concerns.
I took a class from this professor, I'm pretty sure I know who it is just because I was in some of those conversations.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we raised our hands or not, but we went through kind of like, how many women here think about when you walked your car tonight after class, like how vigilant are you about what could happen?
Mhm.
And like girls are thinking like, you know,
I'm
I
vigilant.
get my keys like this, and I have pepper
Yeah.
spray, and I do
Mhm.
this, and I do this, and I park in a certain spot. And then he would go through with the guys, like, how many guys in here are vigilant when they walk to their car? And that's kind of where that conversation came from,
Sure.
and that's where it was, the guys just kind of nonchalantly walk to their car, and the
Yeah.
girls are prepared for battle.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think
That's
that's
the
where
thought
we're, I
process.
think that's where we're at, and that's why we can't talk about guys as being victims so much, but they are.
Well, I think it's
Just
also
because they're not aware of it in their mind doesn't mean it isn't
Like,
gonna happen.
I feel like the rates of men being raped once they're over like adolescence are much lower.
I think we don't
Unless they
talk
go to
about it.
prison.
I'm.
If you are raped as
Yeah.
a man, can you have that conversation?
But what I'm saying is,
No,
I,
that's
but
what I'm
let's
saying.
hold on a second. Like, let's just talk about like what we actually know from the numbers. I think that it's pretty like there is a reason why women are focused on more. It's because like after age 18, like after adolescence, women aren't likely to be out raping men, and like men raping men it makes up a small fraction compared to men raping women.
The women are seducing young folk, young boys all the time.
Okay, that's
Seducing
that's becoming
young
more of a different
boys.
color now.
You know, okay, but
Well,
then we
yes.
should, but still, see, and out of this action, just like you're saying, we can't leave out the turnout. See,
Okay, yeah, turnout,
The
yeah.
turnout
Mhm.
is a powerful opiate, if I should say, that can captivate that young boy's mind. You know, I remember when I was, I used to be out in the street, and I remember a young man that got turned out, and it was horrible. And turned out by a prostitute, because she liked it. And he was a budding singer, and he ended up on drugs
That's
and
the,
sitting around doing nothing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Because
I'm
he
not
got turned
denying,
out.
I'm not denying the statistics that we know of. I'm just, you know, and I do know that patriarchy is definitely physically harmful to women, but I think we have to focus on patriarchy is also harmful to men. And if it's 6 to, or 1 in 6 or 1 in 4, it's still too many. If it's
Mm.
1 in 12, it's too many.
Yeah.
And I
It's
think
1 in
that
100 is too many.
it's too many.
Sure.
And that we need to think about how we all suffer. That's my point. It's not that, you know, men shouldn't be protective, and women should also be protective of men.
I want to read on something you may be familiar with. Being from the east side of the state in Wayne County, I learned that some of the people who were, that is, boys who were in a situation of human trafficking actually were the ones who were trying to be straight and, how you say, straight and narrow, and being in organizations like Boy Scouts, being Cub Scouts, being, you know, in church groups and all that. And the leaders were the ones who were, how you say, putting clamps on them.
Well,
And I mean, that was on the east side of the state. Now, I don't know if that happens over here.
when you talk about church, that's a whole huge can of worms.
I forgot to say something too, and there's, I know plenty of guy stories where the guys have been turned out
Yeah.
by babysitters,
Yeah.
aunts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so
right,
on.
right.
So when you're
And
sitting
they-
down alone with guys and you're willing to listen to their stories, there's a lot of them to be heard.
Right, they may not be
Sometimes
street corner
there's that-
hustlers or
right,
things
yeah.
like that, but
Mhm.
it happens in other
Yeah.
ways.
Right, there's that assertive, aggressive type
Yeah,
female.
I didn't mean to overlook
No,
that. You
no,
were right.
No,
Yeah.
you're fine. We're just having a nice discussion.
Okay. Yeah, you're right.
Well,
I'm
we're
just-
really coloring a lot tonight.
Okay,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I've just been kind of spending some time listening mostly, but
Sure.
trying to get my thoughts organized.
Yep.
And I was just trying to kind of look at the real underlying characteristics of like who is vulnerable. And so I did understand that, you know, children are in our society are especially vulnerable. And I see what you were saying, that like, you know, once a man is above a certain age, like his probability of being raped is much less. And I was thinking, you know, some of it is kind of like this cultural, you know, or people who have like mental health problems who are around these vulnerable people that don't really have any options or are under their protection. But then I keep getting back to poverty, because that's when I would see somebody, especially in America, in this consumer nation that we are, like you're left with very little options if you have no money. And so I was just even stepping farther back and looking at our system, like the government or like high schools could be like human traffickers, or like, you know, people that are in like,
Sure.
or people that are
Yeah.
young boys going into, what is it even called? Prison for young men. I mean, juvenile
Yeah.
homes or like
Yeah.
foster
Yeah.
homes, like.
And what about all the guys who end up in prison?
Right.
Oh.
And they're all being
Well, I'm
raped,
just-
and we
I don't
just
know, I'm
look
just
the
saying-
other
I'm
way
just saying
and
they're-
act like it's not happening.
Or
They're
I'm just
all
saying
working
the system
hard,
isn't
gaining money.
taking care of some people, or they're just getting
Right.
they're getting thrown out essentially.
Exactly. They're like
Right.
throwaway kids, like
Or-
what Emily
or-
was saying.
Or just economic forces that drive down wages and, I mean, the food stamp cuts, I mean,
Right.
things that sort of say, we're almost creating an impoverished underclass that will be so desperate, so needy,
So
so
optionless.
deprived, that they will take whatever crap work we give them because, you know, that's the best they can do. And that is a part that really concerns me long-term going forward, whether it's slavery, commercial sex exploitation, or just, you know, bare bones minimum wage.
Yeah, and
less
this
labor.
came up very briefly, but somebody mentioned that kind of people's understanding in the technology gap and how quickly things are moving,
Yeah.
and how you can miss that boat really
Mhm,
early
sure.
on in your
You
education.
don't have those skills.
Yeah, you're not going to have the global skills in America today,
Yeah.
the digital skills to be a successful citizen. And like, you know, how do
Yeah.
you equip people
Yeah.
so they have options? And I was just stepping, because I think just the way inequality is moving in our country, I think is contributing to the poverty that we've all kind of recognized as a real limiting factor to people who are vulnerable.
I think you're correct.
The different strata are isolated from each other, and that's why we're hearing what
Mhm.
I think of personally as bullshit about poor people that don't work.
Oh, yeah.
and
Mhm. The
People,
stereotypes.
all these
Very
stereotypes,
true.
and that, and we think that only they are victims, you know, and we're sorry about that, but that's what happens when you're, and in many ways, it's vicious capitalism.
Right, because de facto segregation in education.
Oh.
Because if you ain't got the money,
I'm doing
if you ain't got the money,
right now.
then you can't go to college.
Mhm.
That's de facto segregation. And it ain't all racial. It's aimed at racial. But you got white folks that get caught up in the fact that I can't afford to send my kid to college because it's gonna cost 12 irons and 13 legs.
Well, and then there's not a job waiting for you after you
Oh,
spend all that money
no.
on tuition.
Unless you go wash dishes or go into the pep trade. or
Right,
something.
make your fast money while
Get
you're
the
young and
fast
beautiful
money.
and
Mhm.
see what happens
So
after
what's the
that.
difference between capitalism and human trafficking?
Well,
Without any protections, there's
I would
nothing.
just like
Yeah.
to
No,
know.
I think without any
But-
protections, there's
Or-
nothing, unless there's a
Yeah.
basic safety net.
If the
or-
market will bear it out,
The
you
market,
know,
right,
right,
and
right.
then when there's greater inequality, then there's going to be more of this, you know, people being desperate, but besides that, the other people, the smaller middle class and upper classes ignoring it. And
But the
saying,
markets
you know,
aren't
they're
moral.
getting what they-
We as a
Yeah, the
citizens have
market-
to
you're
imbue
right.
a level of ethics into our marketplace.
Right.
That is what regulation is.
Market ain't moral.
Like, I mean, in some ways, we need to demand that the marketplace operate in a certain way, because otherwise the physics of our economy are going to create a whole different set of output, which
But
one
the
of those might be
affluent-
human trafficking.
Affluent are always gonna control it no matter what. I don't know what they call it,
Absolute power.
yeah, absolute power, but there's a
What?
certain term for that. It starts with an E, or I should say
Oligarchy.
Oligarchy, right.
Right.
So is that what we're
Yeah,
dealing with right
it's
now?
the rule of the very rich and the very wealthy.
Oh,
that's what
kind
we're
of
at
dictate
now.
the terms everybody else.
I thought that's what it was.
All right, I'm going to pay a little gatekeeper here. We are probably at our time limit, so I want to give people a chance to give one last thought on this topic before we take a break and then move on to our current events issues. So who would like to sort of give a last word or two on this human trafficking issue while we wrap up this episode of IGE Talks? Go ahead, Paul.
I think we've had a great discussion. I mean, it isn't, but you just can't put your hands around this.
It's a big issue.
You know, and as a person that have worked with people in trauma, you know, irrespective of what the outcome of our conversation is, we've got to be cognizant of trauma.
Yeah.
And people sweep trauma under the carpet all the time, especially the church.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
some people consider it character building,
That's
you know.
right. So anyway, that's my wrap up. You know, we've got to be cognizant of trauma.
And I think Bonnie wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted to end with a question, and that is, okay, it's so huge, the topic, it's so vague and so specific, and it affects everybody's life. And I think one of the things that really brings out the trouble in pinpointing it is asking the one question: how could we end human trafficking?
Yeah.
And then if we come to that, if we could think of any answer, and wow, that's what does that end up becoming? What's it a critique of?
Yeah.
There's so much. I mean, there's a law enforcement side, you know, holding the perpetrators accountable when we can. There's a treatment side, bringing young people or anybody who's been caught up in this spiral of violence and exploitation into a healthier way of life, giving them services, giving them counseling support that shows them an alternative, a better way. And like we sort of said, shifting our own mindset, getting away from victimizing or blaming the victims themselves, recognizing that maybe we can take some steps in our own lives. Even we haven't really talked a lot about commercial, informed consumerism. Are you buying fair trade products? Are you buying goods and services that
And
were
can
not
you?
stained by human trafficking? Go ahead.
And
Bob.
can you?
Can you? Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a
it's
very
really hard.
elaborate enmeshed web. I mean, you can at least take some steps to try to, extract yourself as much as you can from this slave trade economy. But it's insidious and it's very pervasive. So, fight the fight.
Yeah, I would just say if you Google, it's a question, how many slaves do I own? And yeah, you might have seen it. It actually provides information on like low-wage labor and forced labor, and also sort of like human trafficking. That I think is a good place for everybody to check out and at least be aware of like what role you can play in anything. And then also I would just say, just in like your day-to-day, everyday life, you don't know who you're encountering or what they're dealing with. So just be on the lookout, or just be kind to whoever you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Our discussion about the oligarchy's role or the role of capitalism in all of this brings me back to another National Geographic article where they gave the history of sugar. And it never occurred to me, the question comes up, how did all these blacks get to the Caribbean? Well, I thought the answer was so that they could be raised and brought and sold into slavery here in this country. But that isn't what, they had a whole industry in mind, and the oligarchy had control of the trade, and they found out they could plant sugar in these islands, but they couldn't harvest it.
Right.
Because the Indian native populations couldn't handle it. It wasn't the kind of work they could do, and plus they were dying off awful fast. They brought blacks in from Africa for the sugar, and all of a sudden the oligarchy that could get their sugar through the trades, from the
From the Caribbean?
from the east. Anyway, all of a sudden sugar was available to everybody,
Well, sure.
and by the time this whole thing got
No, we don't have diabetes.
And then in 1800, all of a sudden, the common man was faced with diabetes
Yeah.
and the whole thing.
Slavery's killing us.
But that was an economic decision. It was massive.
Well, but it
I've
also set the
traveled to
template
Caribbean
for
islands,
where
and I
things are
see.
now with our smartphones, with
Yeah.
our coffee, with our cheap clothing that we buy at the big box discount stores. Made
Yeah, and people demand it.
Oh,
yeah.
Our marketplace demands products.
Sugar,
That
coffee.
demands cheap sugar. Sometimes it's like, I need to pay the actual cost for this good. Like, we can't just drive the
Yeah.
quality and I mean, not necessarily quality of the fabric, but the quality of the human essence that generated this material.
Is it worth paying a few more
Yeah.
bucks for that shirt or that coffee because it doesn't?
And
have a
that's why I
fair
feel like the marketplace isn't moral.
Yeah, well,
So
yeah.
Because it's gonna
the
just-
marketplace is describing is actually part or the root of how the human trafficking occurs.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, for the
Yeah.
benefit of the rich.
It drives them in.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Bonnie, Katie, for bringing this topic to our consideration, providing some background, and for the rest of you for just weighing in. It's a topic, like as Paul said, you can't completely get your hands around it, and we may revisit this down the road further as our understanding, as our efforts to combat this evil maybe gather a little bit more force and substance. So we're shifting our gears now to kind of focus on this unique moment in time that we're in. October 3rd, 2013 is the date today, and just a couple days ago, the United States government went into a state of shutdown. At least portions of the government have shut down due to an impasse that has occurred between the House of Representatives and the President and the Senate, which of course, as we know, are controlled by different political parties here in the United States. We'll go into the issues as we are, but we're going to just talk a little bit about what's going on with this the sequester, the government shutdown, and the threat of default that lies before us in the middle of this month, when apparently the United States government will run out of funds and will not be able to apparently take on more debt at the risk of defaulting and not paying its bills, potentially sending the world economy into any number of stages of chaos and disruption. But before we get into the politics of all that, because I think we will be getting somewhat political tonight, I just want to say that anybody who's watching this show is thinking that we're just here to carry water for the Obama administration or make apologies for the Democrats, might want to tune into the episode that we filmed in September where we talked about the then imminent invasion of Syria, which of course current events have delayed that at least, and maybe thrown off those plans, where President Obama himself had come out with a very strong threat of military intervention in Syria as a result of allegations of chemical weapons attacks. And I think a lot of us in this room took a very critical stance of the president and his militaristic plans, and there were some protests, and boy, doesn't it seem like that month kind of was a long time ago. The topics of discussion have shifted quite a bit, and now we are in this kind of more domestic politics standoff, not so much foreign affairs. And I think, at least I know, I'm pretty loaded up with a lot of views and opinions on just what a miserable mess we're in. We've kind of titled this episode Electile Dysfunction. The idea that our representative government has really broken down at some point. It's put people out of work. It's put people who rely on essential services in a very perilous state where children may not be getting the meals that they are counting on. Medical research has not been done, treating victims of serious illnesses. Of course, there's been a lot of publicity about parks and memorials being shut down and any number of things. But I think even deeper than that is this idea that somehow or another our ordinary institutions can just be shut down because an activist group has somehow seized control of the agenda and perhaps outgrown their ability to actually govern responsibly in the pursuit of some kind of purist ideological crusade that they're on. So let me just kind of recount the facts. The continuing resolution, a bill that needs to be passed to continue funding the government, ran into opposition in the House of Representatives, controlled by the Republican Party, because a group of representatives wanted to attach legislation that would defund the Affordable Care Act that President Obama and his party passed back in 2010. That has resulted in this gridlock, this standoff, where the president refuses to budge. The Senate has sent back a legislation called a clean CR without that anti-Obamacare language attached, and the House refuses to take up a vote on that legislation because they're kind of afraid, the leadership is, that if a straight up or down vote was allowed, the continuing resolution would pass as is with the Affordable Care Act fully funded. It would become settled, I mean, it is settled law already, but it would become more of a norm. And I think the Republicans who want to disrupt this affordable health care initiative would then have a much harder political task in front of them. So I'm feeling pretty cynical, pretty discouraged, and pretty upset. I'm going to try to keep my emotions in check as we go. But I've laid the groundwork. Who'd like to kind of carry the torch, and we'll just get the conversation
just
rolling?
to pick it up from where you left off there,
Sure.
I heard today through my grapevine and the internet that we need to be in touch, of course, with our representatives, but
Yes.
don't get discouraged if you call Representative Amash and you can't get through. His phone is ringing off the hook. And I don't think those are people calling him to applaud
Okay.
shutting down the government. And the same with Huizenga, you know. I think we're not the only ones, and everybody I run into, everybody is just, they're right on board, you know. What is the matter with this Republican Congress? And they know who's responsible.
Mhm.
They know.
Well, and let's talk about our representatives, since Representative Justin Amash kind of represents kind of the east side of Kent County, going on down to Battle Creek, and Representative Bill Huizenga, where I live in Wyoming, kind of the west side out to Ottawa County and the Lake Shore, are both pretty diehard members of this Tea Party caucus who are on board with Texas Senator Ted Cruz and others who say, shut her down, no funding for Obamacare, and really drawn a very hard line. It's a very small minority of activists, if you will, in the Republican Party, but there's apparently a fear on the Republicans' part that if they just go along with the law that's been passed, they're going to be subject to the primaries by more extreme right-wingers and the fundraising and perhaps the other threat to their longevity in office. And so there's kind of an intimidation going on, and it's really holding the rest of the country hostage.
Until last night, Justin Amash had on his website that Obamacare was unconstitutional, even though the Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Yeah,
isn't that how our system works? They say whether it's
Yeah,
constitutional
it's
or not,
completely
not Justin Amash.
Right, it's belligerent, it's a dug-in ideological hardcore stubbornness that clings to its own belief despite objective reality saying, no, the Supreme Court said this is constitutional. They are the authority on what's constitutional and what's not.
But they have a situation that's going on that's similar to what happened down south after the North and South, the Civil War.
The Reconstruction
Yeah,
and segregation
yeah.
and all.
Nullification.
Nullification, okay. Tell us
Nullification.
about nullification, Paul.
Here's nullification in its finest, because there are laws that, you know, the South wouldn't take. After the laws were passed, after the war, laws were passed to deal with some of the issues, and the law would get down there and say, we ain't doing that.
So whether it's states'
Whether
rights
it's
or
states,
sovereignty
yeah.
or whatever.
That law
Plessy
don't
versus
apply.
Ferguson.
That law don't apply. And see, and this is racist.
Okay.
See, I mean, what we're not understanding is that it's aimed at Obama. And I'm just gonna be frank. The difficulty of Caucasians taking orders from an African American, it's there. I'm an African American. Don't take that much to, you know, to not identify me. But once upon a time, I was a county commissioner. And so I understand, sitting in that commission, I mean, when I first went into the commission, I had people, I could try to raise my hand to get up and speak, and nobody would acknowledge me. Until I acted silly one day. I said, I'm not taking this anymore. And I raised my hand, and they said, they just went by me. Then I got up and said, I'm speaking. I don't give a damn whether you let me or not. I'm up here, I'm standing up, and I'm talking. And from that time on, it was, there goes Mayhew with whatever he wants to say.
Sure.
You know?
Well, and this very persistent identification as Obamacare.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's-
I mean, even though President Obama himself and the Democratic Party and the media and everybody else has sort of said, okay, we'll take it on.
We'll adopt it.
We'll embrace Obamacare. And as Obama himself said, when this starts working in a few years, I ain't gonna call it Obamacare anymore,
Mhm.
because, you know, it will become more.
Omnicare.
Romney
Didn't
care.
Romneycare work out well?
Well,
Did
exactly.
Romney do that?
Right. But I do believe you're onto something, Paul. I mean, you know, I think it's very obvious, the fact that this law was quote unquote imposed in the eyes of the Republicans, and the personal element to this. It's not that they're against health insurance or against the fact that Obama sponsored this, drove it, even though I think Obama in many ways handed this over to a lot of other
We
interests to
have to go
develop this
further
plan.
back than that.
Sure.
Before it was the Affordable Care Act, we were serious. We came within one vote in the Senate, according to some stupid rule that they gotta have 60.
Yeah.
We came within one vote of having Medicare for all, call it single payer.
Single payer, right, universal health care. all that.
Universal.
Right.
That would have been nice.
And
Yeah.
the compromise was what they came up with, and they went to the state of Massachusetts that had this plan that Romney had.
Well, right, yeah, the Heritage
Worked.
Foundation
Yeah.
developed it,
Yeah.
Mitt Romney, Republican governor in a blue state, Massachusetts, implemented
And the
it.
whole thing depends upon, having everybody enrolled to make it
Right.
affordable.
Well, and.
So,
and- well, if I could
that
just
was
finish my
all
one
part
point,
of
too.
it.
The
The part they
140
resent, they seem to
amendments
resent.
and Republican-based inputs were put into this legislation, far more Republican amendments than Democratic.
Yeah.
And when it came down to it, it was just raw political power that said, we will not grant one single Republican vote to this legislation, so they couldn't claim it's bipartisan, and now they're saying it was rammed through, even though I think there was a very collaborative process in actually developing the legislation
Absolutely.
itself. They just refused to accept a new status quo.
And here's two things I'm hearing right now, because what they're attempting to do is end it. And
Well, they
they're
want
not
to
telling us what
repeal.
would take its place.
Well,
We just start
want to
over, go
repeal,
back to
they want
square
to
one.
defund, they
Yeah.
want to delay. Those are the three
Oh, yeah.
stages that the Republicans have
But-
kind of proposed.
But that's not what the left is saying. The people I'm talking to who remember and fought hard in the beginning and fought well, they're saying, well, if they did throw it out, that opens it up. Now we can go for national health care the way it's supposed to be.
Well,
And-
no, don't even, I don't even want to humor that.
I don't either, but that's where we need to go, but that's what they're
You know-
afraid of, is that the Affordable Health Care Act is gonna take us there.
Well, obviously,
It's gonna take us to
the
national.
idea of healthcare being established as a principle that a citizen can have access to in some affordable, partially government subsidized way, is a scary idea to, the raw libertarians, which is every dog, fighting for their own scraps. Did you want to jump in, George?
Well, I think it has more also to do with specifically like John Boehner's not wanting to lose his job.
Well, right, that's the inside baseball side of things with the politics.
Yeah, because basically if John Boehner wanted to call a vote today, he could call a vote, and
Yeah.
I'm like 90% sure, or 100% sure it would pass. Like they've got 13 Republicans with him, it would be 14.
Oh, I think 20 or more that are
Yeah,
ready to vote for a
20.
clean
You know,
resolution,
and,
right?
yeah, right. So at least 13 that have come out and said like this is not a good idea. Like this isn't the right way to be doing it.
Right.
And even like people from the Republican from Michigan
Mike
representatives. Yeah, Mike Rogers was even saying like I don't think this is the way we should be doing. This isn't a smart way to be doing it.
So then why aren't we having that vote?
Because
What's in the way?
so if John Boehner
He
calls that
controls
vote,
what legislation comes to the floor.
Well, how can we remove him?
because my thing is if he calls that vote,
In fact,
No,
that's
really, there
what
must
he
be
wants
some
to do.
strategy
I
to do it
I tweeted
institutionally.
that the Democratic National Committee right now should be doing recalls on Cruz. They should be doing
Well,
recalls on him.
those are very time-consuming processes.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
they
you
may
need to
start
start
that
that
Well, they
process.
lose though, because Cruz comes from a super heavily Republican
Yeah,
district.
it don't matter.
Well,
He's from
okay,
Texas.
but there isn't a more immediate urgent issue.
But isn't there a difference between removing him from office versus removing him from what he's doing?
Well,
I really
okay,
just don't
John
understand
Boehner-
what's
Okay,
happening.
John Boehner's Speaker of the House, and he is elected by his party, okay? Now, Nancy Pelosi could be, if the vote was split and all the Democrats voted for Pelosi and there was a split of Republicans going for, some for Boehner, some for, whoever else, it doesn't have to be the majority party as the Speaker of the House, it's whoever gets the most votes. But right now, the Republicans have the most votes, and it's an uphill climb for a sitting Speaker to be removed from that position. But he is concerned that if he were not to carry the Tea Party's water, so to speak, there could be a revolt, and even allowing a clean resolution to pass would undermine some of his authority within that.
So he almost lost.
But if he was really for the clean resolution, he would do that.
But
not,
well,
he's just there for his job.
He's for himself, and I think he's also there trying to see what he can do to avoid the impression of caving in and just losing, because he is surrounded by, there's a dagger hanging over his head within the Republican hardcore conservative circles that anything short of, taking it all the way to the max is caving in, and that's not going to sit well.
So what possible outcomes can we have here? I'm still really confused.
So I think, basically I think that what's gonna happen is, like, right now we haven't started to feel any of the real bad effects. Like, probably most of us haven't really noticed, as long as we haven't been trying to go to National Park or something like that.
Right.
But
or
like,
we're not working in a job.
Or we want to get disability.
Right.
If
So,
you wanna
but
get
in,
disability,
so in the
you
next
can't
week
get
or so, Michigan's going to run out of money to do its food stamps.
Yeah.
Which is going
In
to
a
be
month,
like
about 1 month, right?
No, this
Oh,
is
no,
it.
about a week. Oh, about a
1
week.
week?
Okay, I get the fact that we're in trouble, but the thing I don't get is how he can do this?
Because it's his.
okay.
I don't get it.
It's his, like, his job title. He controls what motions are brought to the floor.
It's a stare down. It's going to be, quote unquote, who blinks first.
It's just a process thing.
So they go without the funding resolution, and then in the middle of October 17th is the date, is when the debt ceiling limit is hit, which is the United States government is borrowing money, selling bonds, basically to, pay bills and actually acquire more debt. Now, the deficits are reducing. They're not as big as they were in years past, partly due to the sequester, partly due to other budget cuts that have been enacted. But if the debt ceiling is breached or other actions are not taken to remove that, then the United States goes into default. In other words, we don't pay our bills, and markets go in crazy, chaotic directions where we don't even know exactly where this
One
will wind up.
man has the power to do this,
Yeah.
and we just sit there and let him.
Well,
because
That's it.
Congress
I
has,
just don't
yeah.
understand how
That's
an
the process.
entire.
It's his authority as. the
But it's
position
like
in
you
the
said,
Is
legislative
it
when
body.
the guy stood over you and told the other guy and said, sit down, they got the dagger over him saying, if you do this, you're through.
Right. So he's surrounded by dreadful options. One, the more dreadful to him personally is basically conceding the fight with the White House and with the Senate and saying, okay, we'll vote on your clean resolution. The other is that he would be the Speaker of the House that brought the United States of America into economic calamity. And not just the United States. I mean, Europe,
talking about
Well, he
China.
doesn't have any other options because nobody's going to give in to this guy.
Well,
They aren't going to go, okay, let's
Well,
repeal Obamacare. That's not going to happen.
well, right, but there are a number of Republicans who think that Obama will blink. Their estimation of him is that he's weak, he's cowardly, he's not really made of strong enough stuff, and
Have
that
they
if they
been
just
watching
hold
him?
firm. Well, this
No,
gets
they
into
haven't.
They've been
the
listening to him.
They've been looking at his skin color.
yeah. Well, and it also gets into the
He
sort of
doesn't blink.
the
They've been
theology
looking at his
of, well,
skin color.
it gets really into what I will call the theology of conservatism, especially of the libertarian, Tea Party side, which is they are in this insulated bubble of belief that says we will prevail if we just hold strong enough. And it is a delusion, and it's very discouraging to think that people in this position of responsibility are willing to engage in this kind of brinksmanship, because this was very unprecedented. There's been government shutdowns before, but the threat to unknowable consequences to prove their political point is pretty disturbing. And to think that grown adults are
So
pursuing
he's
this
so worried
course.
about his job that in
Yeah.
1 week time, you said people are going to go without
Yeah.
food.
Oh, yeah. Well, the market's
his
already
job is
dropped,
more
what, 400,
important.
500 points. So Wall Street
Yeah,
is
so
suffering.
like, so
There's all
for
kinds
instance,
of
job
problems.
numbers, like
Yeah.
the job numbers, our statisticians, our government statisticians aren't working.
Right.
So like Wall Street didn't get jobs numbers today, so that introduced a bunch of certainty, and the Dow's off. Like
Food
100
testing,
points.
environmental cleanups are not happening
The
because.
police that responded today
Yeah.
to the shooting on the Capitol Hill weren't being paid.
Right, yeah.
It seems like there's like 3 teams within the Republican Party.
Okay.
There's like one team that comes from pretty moderate districts that are getting calls like, what are you doing? This is gonna have a
Right,
really
they're
bad.
the old-fashioned swing district, we call
Right.
it, you know.
And then I'd say that there's like a group of people who are really like, are in the best situation because they're in the middle and they're come from pretty conservative districts and really like, they can kind of play it either way.
They know they're gonna get reelected either way.
Yeah,
But
so-
they just don't wanna go through all this.
So they can kind of sit and wait and see what happens, like how mad is their constituency gonna
Right.
be, like how bad does it have to get before their constituency gets
Mhm.
mad and starts actually blaming things on them.
Mhm.
And then I think there's a group with like Ted Cruz and some
Yeah,
other
the
people
ideologues, right.
that are just like in this, to like, this is it. Like,
Yeah,
all
and,
in.
and they're, you know, they've been labeled anarchists or hostage takers, and I think there is a sense that if there was an economic meltdown or some kind of, you know, volcanic disruption of government and society, they'd be okay with that because this is their opportunity to sort of really assert this new order of things, and it's
What's their
crazy.
new order?
Well, that's a great question, because, you know, and I'll just talk to the camera here, there's not one society on earth that's ever been governed by libertarian principles. It's an ideology, it's a theory, it's a concept, it's a temperament, but it's not a functional way of actually leading a society or developing an economy. But unfortunately, there's a fad that's produced with the Ayn Rand and you know, Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Justin Amash, who have this unmitigated faith in free markets and lack of government regulation that's just going to somehow let everything boil down to everybody gets what they deserve. And
Me first.
well, very much so. And they feel like giving everybody a fair opportunity, less regulation, et cetera, then everybody's potential will somehow be realized. But it's
I'm all
really
cool with that,
Yeah.
not really, but
Well-
I'm gonna pretend to be all cool with that if everybody starts at the same limit. So we
Right,
take
right.
away everybody's money
Mhm.
and go, okay, there you go.
Yeah. Well, that.
I'm not
that's
really
a-
cool for
well,
that, but
right.
I mean, the thing is they say they're for
Yeah.
that, but then they start out with so much more than
Well,
everybody
and I
else.
think
Like a game of Monopoly, that would be
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
Throw the dice and
But it's
where
not
you land
even
is,
that.
you know.
But they tap into a lot of resentment. Some of it, like as Paul has said, is racial. The lazy welfare queens, the moochers, the parasites who are just sponging off the producers, the makers versus the takers, and all of that. That's a part of it. And I think I've seen a lot of action on my social media feed of, well, if this was a household budget, if my family was this much in debt, I wouldn't just be taking out new credit cards. But the United States government is not a household budget. We're, you know, it's a much more
We
complicated.
have to live within
entity.
our means or we go broke.
Well,
Yeah, I would like to ask, what's
Yeah.
money? Because they keep acting like
Yeah,
this is money.
really.
What is
Yeah.
money?
Yeah.
Money
Yeah.
is, they act like
It's a
the
shared-
money
It's
is.
what it is supposed to be.
They
Yeah.
act like money's a thing. Like,
Property.
Yeah.
it's something that's solid and is always there.
Mhm.
But money's squishy. It's about relationships.
Well, it's a mutual contract. I'll accept
It
your
is.
money because I know
It
there's other people out there
changes
who will take it.
value all
Right.
the time. There's
Right.
more and less in there.
Yeah, well, and large-scale economies like the United States have the ability to print money, and I mean, it is a lot of smoke and mirrors, but it's smoke and mirrors that everybody believes in and plays along with, so it continues to hold value.
That's why I think, like you said, the money for them is in a household.
Yeah.
It's something different, because money for us really is concrete. We don't
Well,
make
sure.
it.
Right.
We don't set the
We can only
standards
earn
that,
it.
we don't set the standards for how much it's valued. We become subject to it.
Right.
But they're the ones setting the standards for how much it's worth.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, it works really well for them to do that. And it works well for them
Yeah.
to talk like they're just like everybody else, and why don't we have a budget? And you know, we all work and make it for ourselves. Well, of course, that isn't true. And it further promotes
Right.
this lack of community and just the, you know, anger and distrust among all different groups of people.
Can you see
I think that one thing that's really been like most disappointing and sort of disgusting, like the #1 rated, most thumbs up comment on WinTV8 about the shutdown of the government is simple. If you can't feed them, don't breed them.
That's just pure resentment
And
hate.
so-
What are we
That's
supposed
more
to
than
do? Just
racist.
go around
So
and?
there's like 50 people
But those
around.
same people are anti-abortion, I'm
Yeah,
for sure.
and so I don't know, like,
Oh, yeah.
it's, the question is like, there's gonna come a point where there's gonna be more people that are gonna be being affected.
Yeah.
Oh, like, I guess I didn't realize that I was getting help from the government with, like, whatever.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Well-
like the guy that's on SSI and getting his Social Security. This comes out and says, I don't want government money.
Yeah.
I don't want government. But you're getting, you know, Social Security, you're getting socialized health care for
Unemployment.
Medicare, you're getting unemployment, but you got a bunch of those people sitting there saying, I don't want government money.
Keep your government out of
Keep
my
your
Medicare.
government out, yeah.
And,
I think the other thing that's gonna happen
Oh.
though is that Republican governors and like officials throughout the country are in a really bad place. Like, cause they're actually gonna be more responsible, like voters always hold state politicians, even if they have nothing to do with it, like sort of responsible for how things go. And like,
Yeah.
when things start falling apart, like food assistance, temporary food assistance to needy families and like women and children and like other pretty basic
Yeah.
services, like,
Yeah.
They need to recall. They need to start recall petitions. And I don't care if it don't look like they can win. See, the American people, you know, I heard a lady this morning on the internet says, I voted for
Wait a
those
minute,
people.
why do we have to recall them when, in 1 year, we're gonna have an election? We can throw
Well, I
every
mean,
one
you
of
need
them
to
out.
throw the gun.
Well,
2014 is gonna
Yeah.
be a big deal.
Well,
It's
and I
got
don't
to be.
think- and I don't know that.
That's a recall.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure
that's
you
a
can
recall.
recall senators and representatives. I'm not sure the statute exists for federal office. I know for states.
You got initiative, referendum, and recall at all levels of government.
Why are we making it seem
Yeah.
as if it's those individuals? I mean,
Yeah.
we have a system set up where one person can be a speaker of a house and can turn the entire nation into
There's
trash.
more parameters than that.
Well,
though.
'cause it's-
just,
well, I just think that this technique is really like new. In the
Yeah.
past, continuing resolutions weren't a thing of like, weren't even a policy issue or tool. It was totally just like, this is our basic
Right.
job. We disagree with you about these policy things, but
Or if there's legislation attached, it's very much nuts and bolts stuff, not this major, you know.
I think there's a system
wrench.
problem if this
Well,
can
yeah.
happen.
Right,
Yeah.
well, the debt ceiling is the same thing.
Well, the debt
In
ceiling.
the past, the debt ceiling was just a voice vote. Bam.
Right.
Yes.
I think,
But then when Obama got in, now the debt ceiling becomes a major orchestra.
yeah, we're not even gonna let this guy play.
But we ain't gonna let him play, because the debt ceiling was always just a voice vote.
right.
Yeah.
And in
No.
2011,
Didn't mean to- yeah.
that was the first time it was really used.
Yeah, no.
And I think, didn't Reagan have like 18 debt ceiling increases or
Yeah.
something like that during his two
it was just a
terms?
course of business.
Yeah.
It was just
Yeah.
part of
There's
business.
this thing called inflation.
Yeah, well.
You know, it happens everywhere, it's
Well, and
happened,
even
it's
the
part
debt
of
ceiling itself
capitalism.
is kind of a symbolic thing. I mean, there's nothing.
Yeah, I know.
You know, and that's one possibility, is that if there truly is intransigence, Obama may have to take some extraordinary measures, which of course then would be seen as
Yeah.
an abrogation of executive
And,
power.
and that's
blah, blah,
exactly,
blah.
I think,
So they're
what the
setting
plan
that up.
is,
yeah.
that like, if we can't get him this way, we'll make him break the Constitution by not fulfilling our jobs. Because his constitutional responsibility is to execute and
Right.
fully, like, ensure, like, the laws of the land are operating.
Yeah.
And their responsibility, they don't have that responsibility. So he's either gonna have to, like, not take due concern to make sure the laws of the land are implemented, or
Right.
he's gonna have to violate
Yeah.
a budget thing.
I read a legal scholar, and I don't have the details, but basically, he, you know, he's in a position where he may have to violate one law or precedent or another. And I guess if he's pushed that, to that extent, he will do that, and I will support that, because I feel this whole effort to undermine this health insurance plan, as flawed as it may be, as short as it may fall of universal health care, and as many people are still going to be uncovered by this legislation, because primarily Republican governors have refused to expand Medicaid, have
Dave,
left tens
we
of millions of
gotta-
people, let me finish, okay?
Yeah, okay.
They've left tens of millions of people out of coverage intentionally, even though there's federal money and legislation to cover them, but they've just decided, we're not gonna make these people eligible. I mean, the level of sabotage that we're facing or that we're dealing with as a society, again, by people in very responsible positions, is really unprecedented. It's a form of economic warfare against their very own citizens.
Yeah.
I think it's only made possible pretty recently with like increased gerrymandering. Like in the
Yeah.
past,
Oh, yeah.
it like would have been much harder to have like these so solidly red districts.
Right,
that
but
are
with
in-
computer information, you can go block by block and figure out who voted
But
where.
whatever happened to our rights, just to be represented?
Well-
So gerrymandering can actually be useful to give minority groups a vote in that way, because then you can, like, make sure
If
that there's.
that's the intention.
If that's the intention.
Right.
Or gerrymandering can be used to just have the dominance of one group.
Well,
But where does
yeah.
the right of us to be heard and to
It's-
have representation go? Is it all
it's-
about winning?
It's very indirect because, well, look at how Grand Rapids is split. I mean, Grand Rapids is almost divided right down the middle, so that there's not an urban center that puts Republicans a little bit more at risk. So you've got half the Grand Rapids population going over to Dustin Amash, half going over to Bill Huizinga, or at least not Metro, but Metro Grand Rapids, I should
Right.
say. And so that core is kind of diluted by all the rural counties that are in those districts.
And so
To
here we
keep-
are,
Yeah.
sitting in the middle. Grand Rapids is Democratic as a whole, the
Right.
whole city votes Dem. But when you move out of the city, it's Republican.
But where's
Well,
our right to
conservative.
determine how we get
Well,
grouped?
that's the thing.
We can't.
It's a-
You don't
it's-
have that right.
It's divide and
It's
conquer
just
right
really
now.
upsetting,
It
because
is,
I
yeah.
thought we were supposed to have democracy, of course, we don't.
Right.
But there's this pretense of democracy.
No, you don't have that right, because then, when they make that decision, the political parties get together and make the decisions on how the districts are gonna be
Yeah.
cut
Then
up.
why do we need
And
those
then they-
political parties?
Then they shove it up the
Why
Lancet.
do we need them? They don't represent
Well,
me,
in
they
a
don't
way,
represent a lot of people.
Right, but it's such a powerful institution that dismantling that, I mean, we've done some shows in the past on electoral reform and third parties and, you know.
Why
when-
have any political parties if they're gonna pull those?
Yeah, well, and that's a great question, but I think we have to sort of
Well,
deal with
at
the
the
reality
state level,
at
the
hand,
party
you
in
know.
power gets to determine how
Right.
the gerrymandering goes. They've got the governor and the Republican
Right.
House
They-
and Senate. So when that 2010, you know, what do you call it?
Yeah.
Each census year.
Count came in,
Right.
and they found
Census
out,
count.
then they looked at the election results,
Right.
and they counted how
The
many people
districts
voted
won't
well.
be
And they
redrawn.
went in there and did a very intelligent job
Yeah, so
of
to me-
dismantling.
In 2020,
Yeah.
there will be a new
Democratic
count,
power.
and we'll see where the state
To me, this
legislature
whole
is at.
situation
Yeah.
makes it seem as if I can look at it and go, wow, they've really shown how worthless the two-party system is,
Yeah.
and how we don't have democracy, and
Mhm.
how a minority group can take over and ruin people's lives.
Well, this is the first time that I think, I mean, I have limited experience in
Yeah.
modern American politics.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just kind of reaching the age where my involvement is maturing, but it's very guerrilla.
Yeah, there you
Yeah.
go.
Like
Good name.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it feels like. And I was thinking just about the way a representative democracy works and how, you know, communities choose these people to go there. And like, do I actually want my representative to speak for me, or do I want him to play the game that's a little bit bigger? Because like, I feel like there are definitely some people in the House that are saying, you know, my citizens elected me to come here and not play.
Mhm.
But like, is it their I mean, we've been kind of talking about it. It's their minimum responsibility to engage.
Well, are they representing their citizens, or are they representing their contributors? You know, the
Yeah.
people who paid their election.
Well, those are the
candidates.
citizens that matter.
Well, right, I mean, that's
Yeah.
weighted voters.
Because, right, I
there,
mean,
right.
money,
Yeah.
So
our
when you look at
corporations
the
are now
Koch
citizens.
brothers and all those guys that buy votes, and the guy that they all pay homage to, that's over the National Rifle Association, you know, I mean, they buy the votes.
Yeah.
They got a guy that they do mantras to, you know, that
Well-
they can't even blink unless they go and pay homage to this guy that's over the National Rifle Association.
Do we think that this political crisis is going to shift the sands at all? Do you think people who might have been independent, middle-of-the-road swing voters who might go Republican, might go Democrat, might go which way, either way, is this going to tilt the scales against the Democrats in the midterms in 2014? Do you think, I mean, how bad does it have to get for people to question some of their own assumptions?
I heard a pretty hilarious open mic moment between Mitch McConnell
Yeah, just
and
today.
Rand Paul just
Right.
today.
Yeah, I wouldn't-
Where essentially they were talking and Rand Paul goes to Mitch McConnell and he says, "Oh, I was just on ABC News and I just kept saying, you know, we're willing to negotiate. We're
Yeah.
willing to negotiate."
Yeah, they haven't poll tested this.
And the
but-
Democrats haven't poll tested this, but they keep saying we're not willing to negotiate, and I don't think that's going to poll well. Like, we're coming out ahead on this.
Yeah.
So
And Rand Paul says, I don't think we really want to be here. I know that, but I think if we stick with it, we can win it. You know, it's very craven, very calculated.
Oh, I
Do you
wanted
see
to
why
hear
I'm
that.
saying we
Yeah.
don't need them?
No,
They're
no,
ruining us.
Well,
or like it's very
be
much
prepared for Rand Paul as a presidential candidate.
We
in
need, no, the thing is
2016.
I think that this has the potential to get people to look and say, wow, maybe we don't need these parties. Maybe we don't need all the money that's going into lobbying them.
Let's,
Maybe we should actually have democracy.
Yeah.
But let me put a plug in for
Yeah.
Move to Amend.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of the people that help facilitate Move to Amend. Move to Amend is a group of people that's moving to try to take the big money out of politics. And to say that corporations are not human beings.
Mhm.
They are not.
And that's what's controlling us now, is corporations, big money. So Move to Amend has got this amendment, national amendment, that they're trying to use right now. And I'd like for people out there in the audience and everywhere to type in Move to Amend
Okay.
on your computers and join the movement to take big money out of
Well,
government.
it's very interesting because Mitch McConnell, we haven't talked about him, but he's the Republican
Yeah.
minority leader in the Senate.
mean-
He's about to testify that he thinks unlimited corporate contributions ought to be the norm, that they can give anonymous money and unlimited funds to any candidate that they wish. So this is very
Why don't
much.
we even vote then?
Well-
You know, it's just a waste of time. Just
Right.
let the corporations vote, because what's
Well-
gonna happen is they keep putting money into
When we
ads and we
remove
keep bowing down
Well,
to the ads.
and that's the thing, the marketing of politicians based on slogan and photogenic appeal and all the kind of corny but effective
It's effective, we're
slogans.
drones.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
it is kind of a.
You use the word anonymous, and I think they're afraid as hell that they are not going to be anonymous. Now, the other day it came out that Google and, there was another one, Facebook, had started contributing to ALEC.
Oh, my God.
Yeah,
What's Alex?
you know.
Whoa,
American
Google?
legislation.
Well, you better
Facebook?
find out about
Well,
ALEC, because
let's
they've
cite
been
that, 'cause
running
I
the
wanna
show
make sure
for the
that's
last
really
40
accurate.
years.
The American Legislation
So that's
Executive
American
Council.
legislative.
You guys are just making
Oh,
me more and
my
more
God.
nervous. I
And
don't-
they are the
But
corporate
Alex
powers
deserves
that
a
write
whole
all the
idea.
legislation that gets into
We've
these
kinda got
idiot
some of it, yeah.
Republican legislators across the country, including Michigan, Wisconsin, where we had all the trouble.
Let's just all put a bag
Well, the
over
right
it.
to work stuff and.
really
Yeah.
I know nothing.
That's right.
You know, anti-public education teachers, all
Yeah,
that stuff.
privatizing,
But I think
whatever.
that this
they
is
can
beyond
do.
like big money, because I don't think, this isn't good, this shutdown of the government isn't good for big business.
No,
It
it's
isn't.
right.
You're
It's like
right.
really like, the problem that the Republican Party did is with, like you're saying, with all this fear about Obama and
Yeah.
so on and so forth, they've created a monster. And that
Well,
monster
you're
is
talking about
unleashed.
business like it's widgets. It's also people who have money and are afraid of losing
Well,
it.
but.
Well, I guess what I'm saying
yeah.
is like major industries aren't benefiting from
Wall
this.
Street, corporate.
They still got
executives.
the global economy. They're
Well,
not
well,
even
But that's
thinking
gonna be
about us
hurting, that's gonna be
anymore.
hurting
Right.
too.
That's true,
But here's the
yeah.
issue, is that a lot of sort of the rank and file, ordinary folks who bought into this marketing scheme, the Tea Party and you know, these easy slogans, have at least reached a critical mass of political, you know, agitators who answer to them, even to the exclusion of big money, because they know there's a lot of money to be made and I mean, Ted Cruz has made lots of money in the last several weeks as he's ginned his followers into this fervor about shutting down the government. And there's been a lot of money being made at that level, to the point of saying, well, you know, we can let corporations kind of go their own way. They'll maybe come back when this all blows over, or who knows what. But
You know, when you're
that's
talking,
really
I got this image of how the United States government funded Al-Qaeda and then how Al-Qaeda came to haunt them.
Yeah,
yeah,
It's
yeah,
I
like
think-
the corporations
funded the Tea Party,
Right,
and now the
because
Tea
they
Party's
can-
coming to haunt
They
them.
can capitalize on those votes, that's part of their base, they
Yeah.
cobble their coalition together, they get the tax cuts, and they get all the other sweetheart deals.
It's
that
like
big business gets.
terrorism,
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
guerrilla warfare.
Well, and I think that
Economic
desperation
terrorism.
of kind of an aging generation that recognizes America is changing demographically, social attitudes, customs, culture.
Hegemony, like,
Right.
like,
Yeah, you
we
can't
are
just
a fading
be-
empire, like,
oh,
this is the UK, like,
Right.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the 20th century.
Well, and even a
Obama
class
did
ratio.
a masterful
But,
job
Yeah.
today, reaching out to the stock market,
Yeah.
to the corps. So if the corps understood what he was saying to them today, then they would bring the pressure on these guys.
Well,
If they
and-
understood.
Well, and Boehner's been.
Obama.
Yeah, but
Boehner's been-
who's he?
He reached out to the
So,
stock market.
he's been saying
Wall
to
Street.
Wall Street and big business, let's put some pressure, because there are some, obviously, a lot of Republicans who will not answer to Obama in any way. I mean, they don't care if he's the President of the United States or the Wizard of Oz or whatever. They're just gonna tune him out. But if Wall Street says, we're cutting back our donations, we're thinking about supporting an opposition candidate. I mean, Justin Amash is gonna get primaried. I can't remember his name, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but he's got a pro-business, mainstream, Vern Ehlers type Republican coming up that's got some money behind him from what I understand, because Amash is too far off the reservation for corporate Republican America. Okay, so as popular as Amash may be, he's gonna have a challenge in front of him, and he's underfunded right now if this other guy
I'm gonna
has.
try to support whoever that is.
Right, right, so very interesting. Now, again, just to go back to our last episode, a lot of us were speaking quite favorably of Justin Amash because he did oppose the military intervention in Syria, which a lot of us in IGE are opposed to philosophically and practically as well. So again, we're not just 100% down the line with everything Obama says or does, but I'm very aggravated with Justin Amash and with Representative Bill Huizinga for their really blind, unflinching support and their smugness. I mean, I follow them both on Twitter and on Facebook, and just the idiocy in this.
Did I tell you my story
Yeah.
about a MoveOn.org demonstration at Republican headquarters
Yeah.
on the west side there?
Oh.
And one of my people said, how come they're flying the Tea Party flag? And they
The
had the
Don't
United
Tread on
States
Me, the
flag,
snake
yeah,
there,
the
yeah.
Don't
There's
Tread
a
on
Tea
Me,
Party
and another.
It's the
Gadsden
old-
flag.
Yeah,
What is
so
that?
the snake,
And
don't tread on me.
they wouldn't
Yeah.
open up or say shut the lights off because we were there, and then we went away, and I came back after the lunch to deliver the letters we wanted to deliver. And I asked the lady that, I says, how come you're flying the Tea Party flag? She says, oh, that's not the Tea Party flag. She says, that's just a coincidence. That's not, I says, oh, I'm wearing this Obama 08, you know,
Mhm.
move on for Obama shirt. I said, this is, I'm not really supporting Obama either, am I? You know. Anyway, I wrote a thing to the press, you know, about it, and they printed it.
Well, you know,
You know, I
the
said,
bigger-
you know, is this the Tea-Publicans of Kent County? You know,
Yeah.
what's going on, you know? And
Can I give a
They took
little-
the flag down.
Oh, well, I'll give a little boost to the Grand Rapids Press. Didn't today, they printed an editorial that actually took me by surprise, really excoriating reckless Republicans for putting us in this shutdown mode. I thought the Grand Rapids
Oh,
Press
great.
would be a little bit more
When
apologetic.
you lose the
or-
Grand Rapids
Yeah.
Press
You
editorial
lose.
section, you should maybe think
You're
about
right.
twice.
Yeah,
like
so
once or twice.
maybe we can throw the
Wow.
link up there, but it's
You're
worth
right.
checking out because they were very unequivocal. This is a Republican shutdown, they drove this, they wanted this.
Yeah.
They're trying to, rewrite history, say, well, we want to negotiate, but these are immoral tactics. I mean, I'll just.
Very
They
immoral.
called out the
Right.
Republican Senate, too, for not putting Obamacare or Affordable Care Act into place.
Well, and even the
They called them out in
Republican
an
so-called
editorial.
moderates in the House, they're, like I say, there's this group that say they want to vote for a clean CR. Last night, the Republicans passed legislation, the piecemeal refunding selected parts of the government, kind of a PR campaign. The Democrats, under those rules, could do an amendment to pass a clean CR, but they did not get more than just a handful of Republican votes. So there's a lot of political shenanigans going on, where some Republicans are talking more mainstream, we want to resolve this, but when it comes time to put up or shut up, they're not casting their vote. They're still marching in party discipline. And I hope there are people who kind of man up or woman up, just get strong and follow their convictions rather than the orders from their corrupt leadership.
You know, when you're in a work environment and you have a problem with people following their convictions, you make the vote anonymous.
Yeah,
You
well,
know, but we can't do that.
Right,
We
the
can't.
Congress
And it's
can't.
good we can't do
Right.
that, but it's like, Oh, I wish we could.
Yeah. Well, Boehner's also been quoted in some closed-door meetings that he has assured some of
Push this.
his representatives that he won't let the government go into default.
Oh, yeah.
So he's already given away some of the game there. It's going to be an interesting, however this thing resolves itself.
Well, what I don't understand is this little card's been around for a while, and I keep pushing it in everybody's face because it says
Yeah.
120 billion.
Mhm.
Now, the book I read to the kids say, you tell your parents that a million is not the same as a billion, is not a
It's 1,000.
trillion. And that's what we're dealing with. And this is what we pay for military.
Yeah. Well,
And that
yeah.
makes me wonder, like you say, our empire's crumbling. And in some ways, maybe it is, but we still have the biggest military.
Yeah.
We're everywhere. Is
And
it really
here,
crumbling?
It tells you how far ahead.
I mean-
And it says in here very
Yeah.
clearly that we could, everybody in the US could have medical care if they made this change.
But be
48
careful.
hours of the
Be
war in
careful.
Iraq and Afghanistan costs $1 billion.
Yeah.
At
Well-
its peak. And that's the lifetime earnings of me and 20,000 other
It's kind of
people.
like the elephant in the
So-
center of everything.
The sheet also
Yeah.
points out that the Pentagon budget, and this is in 2010, was 54% of the entire budget, okay? Now, that's gone up 57% since. And then we got this guy quoted in the Grand Rapids Press the other night, and I guess I should have cut it out and written another article. But he said, well, if this Obamacare goes through, and he's speaking at a local, gathering of responsible people, he says, half of our budget's gonna be for, Medicare.
For poor people.
Half, or it'll be, it'll be that kind of thing. Well, that's impossible, because the Pentagon already has more than half, so how are they gonna vest,
It's
control
confusing,
of the...
isn't it? It's what do they count and what don't they count?
Yeah, they try
What's
to
the
confuse
whole?
the people.
Oh, sure, what don't
How's
they
the
count?
media reporting this? Is your, I mean, now
Well,
we have a TV.
they just pass it on.
Well, I think the media, which media are you talking about? I mean,
I'm
there's
talking
a
about
conservative,
TV, kind of national.
hardcore.
I would say that the general spin is not good for Republicans,
Right.
if only for the fact that, because this, previously, they had tied, like, government shutdowns to budgetary issues.
Right.
And this is, like, pretty clearly not tied at all to a budgetary issue, so much as it's like, we know you got this passed, we know it was taken to the Supreme Court, and we know that it's the law, but we don't like it. We don't have the votes to, like, actually get rid of
Nullification.
it. But we have the votes to, like,
Right.
stop doing our job. We can stop.
And I think there's a pretty small, there are certainly some people who are hardcore committed to not wanting to accept Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, expanded medical benefits. But I don't think most people are so shackled to that issue that they're willing to say all this other pain and further pains yet to come are worth, throwing this law out the books. And because the law is the law. It's already baked into the budget. You can't just undo it. And again, there's a political calculation that the further we get into the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, the more people are experiencing those benefits, and how does a politician run on taking benefits away from
Yeah.
people who otherwise have nothing?
Mhm.
And
Very
my point
desperate.
to anybody who's listening and saying, but, and wants to cut me off and shout at the TV is like, people already have these benefits. People are already banking on it. And there is no alternative. There's no backup plan. There's no Republican, option that says, well, let's just do it this way without throwing more people into poverty and also disrupting the whole medical industry and the insurance industry that's already been working on this for several years. So this whole idea of defunding and repealing and replacing is really the most ludicrous fantasy, really driven by hateful ideology.
It's like you're having, like, bring it back to the family analogy.
Yeah.
You're debating with your family where you want to go out to eat, And it's like you have this big long fight. You want to go to one place and you get there and it's closed. So you go to this other restaurant. You got done with the meal, and then your dad's just like, I'm not paying for this. I know I said I'd come here and pay for this
Sure.
when we had dinner, but
Right.
you guys paid for it. Like,
Put me in jail.
yeah,
Yeah.
put me in jail. Yeah, I'm not going to pay
They
for
don't
it.
pay for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
Exactly what they're doing.
But it affects, one of the things I thought was so wise with the food stamps, you got doubled up if you bought local produce.
Yeah.
So the money's coming back to our farmers
Right.
in our own locales.
Well,
And-
same.
And all these money that's what's gonna happen to all these little
That's right.
places?
Food
all
They're
stamps
over-
aren't
accepting
just
food
for
stamps
food.
now too.
Right.
They're taking food stamps.
Right.
Our farmers down here at the market, just.
Yeah, well, they're gonna go out of business. That's what's gonna happen. We already got, what, 800,000 people on the federal level, plus another million contractors.
Well, and
You
plus
know,
all
so,
the
so
services
you
and
got
goods. Right.
1.8 million people that was immediately affected.
Right. And, you know, some may get those monies paid back in back wages, some certainly will not. But that's a lot of economic spending power that's circulating, that's been withdrawn, whereas tax cuts tend to go into savings accounts and
Right.
investments
But
and
it's
all that.
true.
But Judy, you know, what you're saying is saying, let's think of the practical human interest aspects, and that's just not factoring
It's just
into
getting lost.
these.
It's totally
Yeah,
insane.
they don't care how many people are being put into poverty. They don't really care how many people are suffering, you know, life-altering illnesses or medical emergencies, or even dying. Old people, young people, healthy people who need some kind of intervention. That is not being considered at all in any of this posturing, and that's
If
right.
God did
Yeah, I
not want them
agree.
shorn, he would not have made them sheep.
Yeah, I agree that they're not thinking
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
people who are suffering,
Right.
but they're also not thinking about the way the economy works, like she
Right,
said.
right.
It's that when you have workers out of work, when you have no food stamps, that means all the businesses that goes
Yeah.
to aren't having business, and then all those employees
Right.
who are in those businesses, and so it becomes this huge thing, and,
Oh, yeah.
and hating on the poor
Yeah.
is a distraction from the fact that the whole economy comes to a halt.
Well, and especially when it's, and so all of that is being weighed against what? Oh, we don't want Obamacare
We
to
don't want
succeed.
Obamacare.
We don't want
Yeah, we
to
don't want,
see a new
we don't
status
want
quo.
our partner in governance. to succeed.
But you're
Right.
missing the other side of this
Okay.
issue. It's like
Okay.
Arms for Hostages and Karl Rove and his,
Yeah.
all those things that they do have two goals. You know, one of them is against Obamacare, but partly Obamacare is an excuse to put the brakes on government spending.
Well, yeah, but, and I think also there's a
Spending
calculated
that
idea.
we-
Yeah, but they're not.
Well, the
saying-
sequester was
Well,
dealing with
right.
that without
As
this
opposed to military
nonsense.
spending.
Well, there's also a sense of if we can create chaos and suffering, and then we can spin it politically to make it sound like, well, it's the president's fault, look at all this
That's all I
failed
see.
economy.
That's all I see.
That's what's gonna happen in the midterms and the 2016 election. They're gonna try to create this
And then-
misery that they can then campaign against, even though they've been creating it themselves.
In
yeah.
North Carolina, my son voted for the president. Now in North Carolina, he's been living there 2 years.
Yeah.
He can't vote in North Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that
Yeah, the
something
whole
else?
voting rights.
The whole voting rights thing is
Voting
now
rights?
coming into play. So you got people that are gonna strip minorities
Yeah.
from their vote.
Oh, and
then
quite
the
actively.
fear tactics that's gonna be imposed is not gonna be aimed just at minorities.
And by the way, there's another issue, you know, we haven't mentioned it, but they wanted the tar sands oil to become.
Well, yeah, the
through
Republicans and.
They
and
put
the-
in 4 things,
Well, and
not
they
just
count
one.
one, right.
Oh, there was a
Excel,
whole list of
it's-
things.
Yeah.
But
It's
that's-
being-
that's
it's
what's
Mitt
really
Romney's
interesting.
campaign platform that they want to attach to the debt limits. Yeah.
I guess like the other thing too is it just seems like with, especially now, like it's easier to become, like it's easier for Ted Cruz to make a Ted Cruz type rise where he had like slick marketing and things like that.
Oh, yeah.
So I've read some stuff about him personally, which I don't want to get like too much into.
Yeah.
But I think it was pretty interesting that somebody that went to college with him wrote an essay
Harvard,
on it,
yeah.
and was basically saying, you know, like everybody I talked to when was like, hey, do you remember Ted? And from both sides of the like political spectrum would go, yeah, I remember Ted. He was a raging asshole.
Yeah, right.
And like.
But he's sewn up that vote.
Right,
That-
and everybody seemed to remember him as being a guy who would develop a really close following of, you know, like a couple friends and really alienate a lot of other people. Like,
Well, he's a fanatic.
I think
mean,
a
right,
good
right.
example would be at his Harvard Law. At Harvard Law, he stood up on the first day and announced that he would be making a study group. However, you could only come to the study group if you were a graduate of Yale or Harvard undergrad, and then if you weren't, then you weren't qualified or.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, and he's learned how to tap into some of that resentment, some of that kind of reductionist thinking that sounds like common sense, but is really just it's just full of jealousy and bitterness and you know resentment. I don't know.
Something that interests me is that the Republican Party seems to, the majority of their platform is about economics. And when I think about providing better, cheaper healthcare to the American populace, in the long term, the outcomes are better in the economic
Well,
world.
that's why Mitt Romney and the Heritage Foundation and all these other Republican think tanks that came up with this market-based, telling citizens you gotta buy private insurance from these, capitalist-based.
Which is capitalism, not
Right,
socialism.
right, but that's the thing, it's not really government-sponsored healthcare in the way that England and Canada and other countries have it. It's saying, citizens, you have to spend your money, and we'll give you some options, we'll let the market.
It's like making you buy stuff.
Right, they're making you buy stuff or pay a penalty.
Just like with
And-
car insurance, they
right.
make us buy car insurance.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So it's not like it's a weird thing that never happened before.
Yeah.
Well, people say, well, I could just choose not to drive a
They,
car.
if
I mean,
you
I
buy
think
a
it's-
house, they
yeah.
make you buy.
Property insurance.
Yeah,
Right.
you have to.
Right.
Do anybody know anything about the Grassley Amendment?
Mhm.
Chuck Grassley created an amendment to the Affordable Care Act that says basically that you have to, the legislators and all the people that work for the government are going to be subject to the Affordable Care Act. That's the
Yeah.
Grassley Amendment.
Yeah.
So,
But I don't think
You got
that
it right.
passed,
That's right. That's
yeah,
what it is.
but they adopted the Grassley Act.
Oh, and I thought there's still an exemption for members of Congress and their staff, that they have to get their insurance through the.
They have to get their insurance
through the exchange, but they get big subsidies, and that maybe, I don't know, there's some kind of
Why are they
exemption.
needy?
I don't know, I don't understand.
Are they currently paid today?
Yeah, and they get it
Yeah.
for a lifetime.
No, I mean, are they being paid?
Oh,
during
yeah,
the
they are
current
being
shutdown?
paid.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
no.
they're being paid.
See, they need to shut the money down.
No, you
But
can't.
they're the
you
ones who
can't
made the
have
laws.
You can't, I mean, they can hold us ransom.
Yeah.
But you can't have your government, your
Oh.
legislative be held ransom for any reason, so you gotta pay them. I mean, there's good reasons why.
Yeah, I
you know.
understand.
People driving to Lansing maybe can't be arrested for a speeding ticket, on their way to a key vote or something. I mean, because that can be used to,
Yeah.
as an anti-democratic.
Why do we have all this hate on the government from the Tea Party? Because I'm thinking the government is what we
Yeah.
get our education from, right?
Well, I mean,
It's
it's
the-
built
it's our
into
police
the-
force.
We the people, of the people, by the people, for the
So
people.
is this an attack on us?
Well,
Yeah.
I think there was a
I
split.
mean, but they make it seem like we hate the government.
Well, I'll go back, and I'll back up Paul's issue about race, because I think a lot of the problems when the Reagan Revolution and what built up to his presidency was based on the fact that through government, people of color, people from a less affluent background were rising into positions of influence and authority. An African American
And
could get a
some women.
well-paying job, and a woman could get a well-paying job in the civil service, and they didn't have to climb the corporate ladder to get ahead. And I think that generated some resentment that I think is at least partially race-based, and as the government being a truly, equal opportunity employer, sort of upset the scale of the status quo back in the 70s and 80s, and I think that's where, Reagan came along with this slogan, government isn't the solution, it's the problem.
They
you
have the
know?
Willie Horton stuff.
Yeah, right. So
Look at this black guy.
Well, there's cultural racism, but there's also the sense that, as you said, Paul, taking orders from a black man or a black
Yeah.
woman, if you're telling this civil servant, this regulator, or this person sitting at a desk saying, well, I've got to fill out this form, or I got to do this or that process, and I'm a proud white guy with a little bit of a racist tinge, why should I have to take orders from you?
That's
And that
right.
becomes identified with the government, and the government becomes this villainous influence.
I think
this-
it has to
yeah.
do with gender too.
Yeah,
like
and
she
gender.
said,
Oh,
because,
women, too.
like,
Sure.
when they,
Women in
you know
authority.
that wheel
Yeah.
they have up for waitresses to put their ticket in?
Mhm.
It came after a study was done because the cooks who are men didn't like to take orders from women. So
Wow.
you had to have this.
So the woman wouldn't speak the order,
Yeah.
she would just submit the ticket,
Yeah.
and he would look at the paper rather than hear her voice
So
telling him
it's
what
about
to do.
subordination,
Yeah.
any group who's
Yeah.
subordinate.
Well, and I think we can.
It could be about poor white men too.
Well, we can draw this full circle to say the Affordable Care Act and the premise behind it that says, people, you got a civic duty. You're a citizen, you got a responsibility to insure yourself, whether it's through a job, whether it's through private insurance exchanges, but we're gonna make it affordable so that people can get the coverage. That compulsory element, I think, has still not sat well with some people. That's the resentment that they have about being told, if I don't buy my insurance, I gotta pay a penalty. And that's.
But it's
that's-
easy to hear from their doctor to
Oh,
say
yeah.
you need to eat more vegetables, but it's not easy to hear it from
Yeah.
somebody else
Yeah.
or the government.
Yeah, well, and that whole, American individualism and exceptionalism, I mean, there's a mythology behind all that cuts against some people to be told, you gotta cut out the bacon and the gravy and the potatoes, and you gotta.
I eat what I want.
You're right,
Yeah.
right, exactly.
And-
I'm a
and
rugged
I think-
individualist.
Yeah.
I pull my own
I think
bootstraps.
that technology, and I really believe it also works against community. And
Oh, sure.
and it
Yeah,
works,
we live in
to
silos.
make the society more divided, absolutely.
Well, it
And
is.
extremer. It gives, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a
Right.
there's a beautiful
Right.
democracy to it, and there's
Yeah.
a beautiful,
Right.
like, popularism.
Yeah.
about
You
it.
can go to your website and have all your
Yeah.
worst
And it
notions
looks like-
reinforced
yeah,
and validated
it
by all
looks
the
like,
other.
oh, look at all these thousands of people that agree with me.
Sure, sure.
Well, they talk about the government like it's evil, and then they say, like, oh, you should get your student loan taken over by maybe some corporation. And I'm like, but the government treats me really nice when I'm having a problem.
Well-
I could call them up and talk to them, and they don't talk to me like I'm trashy, and they put the payment where I can afford it, and then I know my money's going to pay for their student loan
Right.
next, and your money for, if you have a student loan, will go to pay for somebody else's. I'm still paying for mine. I'll pay
Yeah.
for it till I die.
Mhm.
I know that, but I know that all that interest is going towards other people's student loans.
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea that our government is a force that I think balances out big business and corporations. I mean, the government has its problems, and there's.
Can Congress people be replaced if something like this is affecting society in such a way?
They're
For
against
so long?
national security. In my
Right, I
mind,
mean-
they have violated national security.
Yeah.
We are at risk of being taken over by some fool out there because Congress will not act.
That's
National security.
But
is
they
at
can't
risk.
impeach themselves, so forget it.
Right.
Well,
But
can the Supreme Court do
Can
something?
people do something? I mean, Supreme
No.
Court is,
No,
Supreme Court is not gonna represent people. That's what I've seen now.
Yeah,
Supreme
true.
Court is doing that for corporations.
Well, especially the
Well,
Supreme Court.
And the
Like,
Supreme
this is
Court
most-
they can't throw people out of office. I mean, that's.
We're gonna get into some real Egyptian
Revolution!
style, like,
Yeah.
That's what-
Well, yeah, right, it's the Tea Party.
We need
the
our own
Muslim Brotherhood,
revolution.
something.
Well, it's different. And, like the climate of the American community, like, I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and like you hear some about the history of how the student body acted, during Vietnam and with a variety of Watergate and different things. And I look around and everyone's much more complacent.
Oh,
Like
sure,
you're speaking
yeah.
about
Oh, yeah.
how people strike in the workplace, and I'm wondering what has changed about the chemistry that makes that no longer a viable action.
What's
Lust
changed is
for
the
money.
economy.
Yeah.
Is the economy so desperate right now? People are taking cuts in pay to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
People are begging
Pensions
for,
are getting
taxed. Yeah, and
You're
people.
lucky if you live in a city that actually can afford the pension they're telling you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we getting close to, what Gil Scott was talking about, Gil Scott Heron was talking about?
Revolution will not be televised?
Revolution will not be.
When
Well,
revolution comes?
I mean, well, here's the thing, I mean, I think there is that potential for some kind of incendiary, revolutionary, I mean, it remains to be seen what those, but there, I guess my point is that on both the left and the right, there are gonna be people maybe looking to exploit the disruption or
Oh,
the,
yeah.
the unpredictability of it. And I could imagine, on the anarchist or on the militia fringes on both sides of the spectrum, there's gonna be people saying, bring it on, let's burn this mother down, and we'll see where that actually goes, but I think
Some
that's.
religious guy said that.
Oh, sure.
He was saying
Oh.
we need a military takeover.
Oh, and we're gonna have the end times and the rapture
Be
and
like
the
Egypt.
apocalypse and race wars. I
Who said
mean,
that?
people are gonna feed the frenzy
religious
with whatever pet theory they embrace. I mean, there are some people who are truly nihilistic and ready for all hell to break loose. I hope that they don't really prevail in all of this, because I think the suffering would be even worse than it already is.
Yeah.
But I think this is where, I'm not on this show tonight to bash people of a conservative temperament. I work and have relations and love many people who are traditional and conservative and
I wish Gerald Ford was
cautious.
in
Yeah.
office.
People
He
who
couldn't get
don't,
elected.
people who don't want to just
I know.
go with the flow or throw everything up in the air. So, yeah, to those of you who might be wondering, are we just here to bash people of conservative mindset? That's really not where I'm coming from, and I will only speak by myself. I think, you know, there's a place for tradition and reasonableness and clinging to the best of the old ways and you know, even vouching for all of that.
Yeah.
And saying, you know, let's be careful, let's not change too far, too fast, too recklessly. But at the same time, there is a time when you gotta take your blinders off and question your own presumptions. I mean, I did the same thing last month when I took issue with what a president that I agree with and support in many ways wanted to do by getting us militarily involved in another Middle Eastern conflict and all the pain and horror that comes with war. I'd like to think that if this was Democrats doing this kind of reckless, you know, desperation tactic to raise taxes on the rich or enact gun control legislation or something like that, I would not really want to go down that road and say, yeah, those guys are doing what they got to do to defend our values. So I do appeal to Republicans, moderates, independents to say, you know, contact your reps, contact your politicians and say this is nonsense, this should not stand. Anybody else?
I appeal to.
Yeah.
I appeal to closure due to time.
Yeah, we're definitely getting late.
That sounds like a wrap.
All right. Well, this is Dave Blakeslee signing out for IGE Talks. Thank you. We'll be back in November with the latest crisis going on in our world. Peace.